evening. I'm calling to order the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, February 26th. Tonight, we have one item on the agenda. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Wolf, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Bundy.
Here.
Commissioner Chase.
Here.
Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Bendel. The record should state that both Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Bendel are absent this evening.
Thank you very much. At this point in every meeting, we ask the public for comment for anything that is not on the agenda tonight. So if you're a stranger in the room, you have something to say, please step up to the microphone. You have 3 minutes to make a comment. All right. Seeing none, then, we'll close this open public comment, and we'll go right to our new hearing, which is why I presume everyone else is here. So tonight, we are hearing the presentation and assessing these 4 elements of recommendation to the town council. This is the residences at the Preserve Residential Subdivision at Robin Drive. Tonight before us is a mitigated negative declaration, a zoning map amendment, a preliminary plan and precise plan, tentative subdivision map, and design review regarding this project. We first heard about this here in the council in 2016, but Mr. Wolf, this is yours to carry away with.
Okay, good evening, commissioners. Thank you very much, Chairman Chase, for the introduction. I know we have a lot to get to tonight. I wanted to give a little bit of a sort of an outline of what the night will look like from a presentation standpoint. So first, I think staff has about I would call it about a 30-minute presentation. We'll try to keep it as streamlined as possible so we can get to deliberation tonight, but it may go above and beyond that. I will start with a brief introduction, but the bulk of the presentation tonight will be given by Milan Navida. He's been our contract planner on this project for the last 3 years, pretty much, and so knows this project inside and out. And we will also be joined during the presentation by Christine Gaspar. She's our CEQA consultant for this project, and you may recognize her from the work that she and her firm did on the EIR for the Restoration Hardware project, which you saw about a year and a half ago. And as well, Peter Brown, who's also in the audience here, our Public Works Director. Have a few slides that I'd like him to get to as well regarding Paradise Drive. And we also have Ruben Martin here as well, our Fire Marshal with the town. And as always, we're here to answer questions for you on the staff presentation and a lot of the material that we have provided you in the report. So I think we're well prepared to do that for you this evening with the people in the room. We do have about I've told the applicant to plan on about a 15-minute presentation, 15 to 20-minute presentation about. Obviously, they're here for comments or questions as well for them. And then, of course, public comment and deliberation. In terms of housekeeping, I did want to point out that we did provide the commission and members of the public with a couple of desk items. You have before you a replacement attachment 23. We had provided an earlier iteration of attachment 23 actually in the Friday packet, but we have the finalized version or the final draft of the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. That's for you. It's also available in the back, on the back table for the public to look at as well. I've provided you as well the story pole certification that along with that and additional public comment that we've received since Friday and as late as about 3 p.m. today.
Before you jump in,
Sure.
I just want to check with the other commissioners here and make a disclosure about the site visits and so forth that we've had out there, and get that off the table so everybody in the audience knows. So Phyllis, you've been
Okay.
to the site.
Yes, Peter and I all three were to the preserved site separately. We were supposed to go together, it didn't work out, and saw the film and walked the property.
Okay, Dr. Bundy.
Yeah, Charles Lee and I both went to the property, met with Mr. Hurd, reviewed the model and the slides.
Great. I've met with Mr. Hurd on site and viewed the fly-through and saw the model. I've walked the property at least twice out there, as late as this afternoon, and observed the water flow and so forth out there. So I think we've all done due diligence. All right, thank you. Please, Mr. Wolf.
Okay, and so as way of introduction, if Milan, if you can go to the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I did want to point out there's been a lengthy process, as you can tell. The commission last saw this in July of 2016 when there was a study session before the Planning Commission to discuss sort of the conceptual plan at that point in time, and the commission provided some comments, and there was the applicant really went back and took a hard look at what their plan and application would look like. So that was done before an application was submitted. They've had several neighborhood meetings, not only with surrounding neighbors, but also with their own tenants, obviously, in the existing apartment complex that they also own. And as well, we've encouraged the applicant to meet with several public agencies that also have some jurisdiction and permitting authority over the project site. So early on, the applicant did meet with them, and if, as you'll hear, has worked with those agencies in giving them a early heads up on the plan and the proposal. They've put up story poles early in the process. As you see, you have the certification. I think that was about a month ago, the story poles went up, which I think was helpful in giving a lot of people, especially a project of this scope and scale. I think it's not, I don't want to say it's not common, but it's a pretty significant effort, I would say, to do all of those story poles in the locations they did. And to do it that early in the process, I think, allowed a lot of the community and neighboring residents to sort of get a better sense of really where these structures were going to be located. There was another recent meeting as well. They have a three-dimensional model here tonight for viewing that we encourage them to also provide several renderings and materials board over here. So I just appreciate it. I think it's, from staff's perspective, we've appreciated the approach that the applicant has taken to work their way through this lengthy process. And then on staff's end, I just wanted to say, we've thoroughly tried to thoroughly evaluate the project and carefully evaluate all the different elements of this project. We've included members of our staff. As you see, we have our team members here from the fire department and from Public Works Department. We've also met with environmental resource agencies and other people who have commented. Really feel we've carefully reviewed the applications for completeness and thoroughness, and also, as you'll see in the staff report, evaluated the required findings and environmental impacts. Next slide, please. So just to jump to the conclusion here a little bit in our staff report, we have, with the addition of several unique project conditions, which Milan will go into in more detail in his presentation, we are recommending conditional approval of the project and have included 4 draft resolutions for you this evening to consider. Those are for approval of the requested entitlements and applications. But that said, of course, we've also included in our staff report other options for the commission to consider and evaluate and ultimately determine and decide this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Milan, who will start a discussion and presentation on the project itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, Chair Chase, members of the commission. So we'll start with just getting everyone oriented with the site and the environs around, and then dive into what is on the site and what led to the site planning, and then look at the design and what the actual project is putting forward, and then close with how we reached some of the conclusions that we've reached and the recommendation that's before you tonight. So looking at this graphic here, here we have the project site in the two tones of green and red highlighted. It's an odd-shaped lot. We've been calling it a figure 8, and in the staff report and the presentation, we'll be referring to the lower project area and the upper project area. Lower in elevation, upper in elevation. The lower project area is really where all the activity is happening with the project, where the development is happening. This is towards the bay, working right off of the Robin Drive, Paradise Drive intersection. And the upper portion is at the end of Robin Drive, butting up into, at the south, the Ring Mountain Preserve. The property itself is right on the Corte Madera town boundary at its eastern extent. So to the east of the site, you have the subdivisions from the single-family residential subdivisions in Tiburon on Cibrian and Taylor Lane. And you can see those lots. This is relatively lower density development properties, single-family properties, large in scale, typically around an acre-sized lots. To the west of the site, you immediately have the Preserve at Marin apartment complex, also operated and owned by a subsidiary of Aimco, with on-site management for those 7 structures and the 120-plus units in the development there. And then along the north, you have some waterfront homes, single-family homes, immediately east of Robin Drive, and then Marin Montessori and Marin Country Day schools to the north and further to the west. So those institutions are there as well, and all the activity associated with those. For the large part, the property is abutted by open space parcels, and just open space in general. So with the Tiburon subdivisions, there were open space parcels reserved as open space that I'm highlighting here. Hopefully you can see it with the cursor. And then we have the county land abutting the upper portion. This is open space reserved, and then obviously Ring Mountain Preserve further to the south. You have more open space further to the west. You have the Ring Mountain trailhead running through this valley here. And then we move into the single-family R1 residential area off westward and further west from there. The lower portion just gives you a zoom in of the site. I wanted to highlight this just to give you a sense of the topography from this angle of this property. We'll look at that a little bit more detail here. The lower portion is just under 6 acres. It's somewhat of an amphitheater kind of orientation with 2 previously graded pad sites already on the property on either side of an existing water course. And then you've got hillsides running kind of all along the eastern and southern flank of the property with wooded areas. The upper parcel has, it's somewhat of a hump shape as it works its way up towards Ring Mountain Preserve. There's an existing informal trail on this private property that people have utilized. You can see the path through there. Generally, water and drainage flows down on either side of this hillside, but there's also existing drainage ditch installed on this northern portion that drains further down into the the lower property. This is the existing zoning for the entire parcel. It's dual zoned, so the lower area has a different zoning than the upper area. The upper is under R1C open residential. This is generally a low density residential designation. We'll get into the details on the next slides. And the lower portion is in R1, the typical single-family style zoning, and you can see that carried through in the westward development just to the west. As far as R1C and where else we see that zoning, we can see it off of the southern boundary here, Corte Madera, additional areas where we have R1C designation. And R1 is, again, throughout the single families in neighborhoods in town. The other zoning that applicable to the site is an overlay, the Hillside Land Capacity, HLC overlay, and that covers currently the entire site, both the lower and the upper parcel. So with R1 zoning, again, it's typical single family with accessory units anticipated, lot sizes of 7,500 square feet or so with a density of up to 6 dwelling units per acre. The R1C is reserved for areas that have unique visual and open space characteristics, habitats and visual characters of value that the town would like to preserve. It's a much more lower density form of development, 5 acres per, a minimum lot size of 5 acres and about 0.2 units per acre. And the other areas that I highlighted in the map there are off Alta Terrace and Fairview Avenues where else this is applied. Hillside land capacity. So really what this adds to a property is that it respects the unique considerations and the unique constraints of those sites. They're typically hillside sites, as in the name suggests, with slopes of 10% or more. And what's required as being within the HLC is more due diligence in the way that the property is assessed for its capacity for development. The HLC is designated in areas where development is anticipated, but wanted to make sure that that development is fully vetted and carefully designed to respect the constraints of the site. This property is identified specifically within the housing element as well, housing element program H26B, which identifies it as a housing opportunity site. The element facilitates development on the site, residential, single-family residential development with accessory dwelling units anticipated. In fact, at least 50% or more of the market rate units that are proposed are expected to have accessory dwelling units. However, to incentivize that and facilitate the construction of those second units, this implementation program also allows the primary unit with the accessory unit included to not be counted towards inclusionary housing requirements, which allows a larger project of 16 units like we have here plus 8 ADUs to be considered to meet its inclusionary housing requirement through an in lieu contribution rather than on-site construction. The development capacity was also analyzed according to the zoning standards, which include the HLC standards for the site, and this is taking into consideration the topography of the area and the carrying capacity. And the housing element identified a potential of up to 16 units with 8 accessory units for the property. However, it did recognize that under a traditional development program, there may be significant tree loss associated with putting 16 units in, and so it ratcheted that down to a realistic capacity of 15 single-family units and 8 second units to mitigate that tree loss. So, as I mentioned, it's identified specifically in the housing element. It is one of 4 sites that are identified as the high potential housing opportunity areas in town, the others being Tamridge, Casa Buena, and Wernham Drive. For Robin Drive, that expectation for housing construction was the 16 or 15 units, depending on what was feasible, and then the 8 accessory dwelling units, which would contribute to affordable housing. 8 were anticipated on the site. The other housing production in town was expected on a more town-wide basis, and this is just accessory dwelling units built throughout the town, and there were another 8 anticipated based on past development patterns and the amount of units that got constructed. In 2018, let me backtrack 1 second. These housing opportunity sites were identified and their capacities identified, and then those were used to demonstrate that the town could meet its RHNA allocation, the amount of housing units that it needed to build over the 2015 to 2023 period, which is what is currently covered by the housing element. In 2018, we did the annual report for where Corte Madera stands in relationship to that allocation. And that's what the table is showing here. So currently we're meeting 2 of the 4 requirements for low-income housing and market rate units. We've met those requirements, and we're still needing to provide more very low and moderate income units to meet the remaining RHNA allocation. But the development on these sites is meant to cover this allocation in totality. Other important aspects of the site to know about is the environmental conditions and constraints. This is a map. The red is not showing up very well here, but hopefully you can see the red border there is identifying the extent of the high fire or very high fire risk area, and then the yellow is showing the maximum extent of the moderate fire risk area. So you can see the entire project site is within the very high risk area. And so in developing the project, we had to take special consideration into what are the factors contributing to increased risk of fire, limiting fire fuels, looking at material of construction, and adding in the appropriate project conditions to make sure that we minimize that risk to the maximum extent possible for future tenants and abutting neighborhoods and developments. Other important environmental considerations are shown in these two maps for the lower area on the left and upper area on the right. These are the habitat zones across the property. There are several special status species and special habitats that are identified on the site, including oak woodland, needlegrass habitat, willow scrub, and others, oak grasslands. So these are all identified here. I'll draw your attention to two of the main ones, which were discussed in some of the public comments we received, as well as the other comments we received during the CEQA process. So in the purplish coloring here, and on the southern portion of the lower parcel up on this hillside, you can see the oak woodland areas, and you have some speckled throughout here. And then this sort of brownish color is the needlegrass, existing needlegrass habitat, and some more in this bottom of the basin here. And on the upper portion, you see significant needlegrass habitat, significant oak habitats as well. But some of these other colors identify invasive species habitats that are on the site that have taken over and somewhat degraded the habitats that we'd like to preserve and support. And so part of the project conditions was looking at those invasives and removing them, rehabilitating some of those habitats, and expanding the desirable ones. This is a zoom in or aerial of the lower portion with Robin Drive here on the bottom of the picture, and Paradise Drive would be off at left. The zoom in is on the graded two pad sites that flank the central drainage ditch or water course running through that lower parcel. So this was another constraint. This is jurisdictional to the Regional Water Quality Control Board and Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Army Corps of Engineers did not take jurisdiction over this water course, but the others had. And you can see here in the summertime conditions, very minimal or no flows at all, but when we do get some rains, we do see a wetland habitat emerge and the grasslands and species associated with that. This aerial provided just for reference, and we may turn back to it later with some of the discussion around comments, but just highlighting in aerial form, where those oak habitats that you saw in the purplish coloring on the site. So this is just get us oriented again, lower parcel area and upper parcel area, and that oak habitat on that southern portion of the lower area. So given all of those factors, the applicants had worked, as Adam indicated, with that timeline over an extended period of time to try and wrestle with the challenges of the site and try to take advantage of the opportunity that was identified within the housing element and the incentives created in the housing element to promote development here, to come up with an initial conceptual plan that was brought before this commission in July 2016. That initial plan for the lower portion resembles significantly what the final application ended up landing on, with one notable exception. So we do still see, or we did see in that concept plan, the same ring road and clustered development pattern using a planned development framework to locate the structures as close as possible to the already disturbed portion of the site and keep it away from the hillsides. The notable departure from what we're seeing today in the application package versus what was presented in 2016 is the location of this large home that was on essentially the central portion of that upper parcel. So in reviewing this initial concept plan, the commission as well as members of the public had a number of comments. Those are highlighted in page 4 of your staff report. They include the proper anticipation and conditions and mitigations to deal with the traffic impacts during construction and after construction of the project. Looking at the environmental program for the actual development, meaning environmental sustainability, looking at environment or energy production on site potentially, gray water management generally, irrigation as well, construction materials. They also talk significantly about this upper parcel and the concerns about the impact of this property on ridge lines, views, the sensitive habitats that were identified on that upper parcel, there was significant concern or a number of people commenting on that informal path and what this would do to potentially disturb or permanently disrupt access through that pathway to Ring Mountain. And so those are some of the major comments that were received. Again, the others are highlighted on page 4. In general, the Planning Commission expressed an openness to consider the approach that was presented, that plan development program that may have incorporated some adjustments to development standards to help facilitate this clustered design, again, to keep the property or keep the developments away from the sensitive portions of the site. One of the central discussions at that meeting, and which we'll touch on tonight, is the request within that plan development program to waive the owner occupancy requirements for the ADUs, and that was to facilitate this unique developer's relationship with the site in that they are a rental property management company and would not be physically occupying any of the units, but would function as a property owner and manager of the property through their on-site office at the Preserve Apartments. The other thing that's incorporated within the plan development, as again we'll touch on later when we get to the project, is carrying over that housing element, inclusionary housing requirement waiver or adjustment to how that's calculated. That's also built into this plan development request. So the applicants then took that comment, those comments from the Planning Commission and the public, and tried to look at what would be the viable solution and address those concerns. They looked at the trail and circulation on the upper parcel, as well as all the other constraints that were expressed, and with development on the other parcel. The other things that they factored into is trying to, again, avoid as much of the sensitive habitat areas as possible where the development was going to be located. And they felt that this cluster design, still as it was shown in the concept meeting, achieved a significant portion of that as it was baked into their initial planning or early planning. But one of the solutions that they identified to this initial problem of the upper parcel was not to move forward with it and force it through, but to relocate that larger residence, what we now know as Lot 16, down on that lower parcel. And by doing that, keep the upper portion open and eliminate all impacts to that upper parcel area. So that cluster design, as I mentioned, was trying to avoid as much as possible the sensitive habitats and also the physical constraints, the topography of the site. And you can see that here in this elevation analysis, the topographical analysis that they've prepared. The purple areas being the flatter portions of the site, and you can see where the buildings are concentrated around that. And then when we do have buildings interacting with more of the sloped areas, there was a conscious effort to orient those buildings so that they worked within the hillside. We'll see in a little bit with some of the architectural drawings that these buildings on the hillside are stepped back and working into that grade. And then with Lot 16, the building is designed to flow with the curve of that topography, which is what's called for in our plan development guidelines and several of the findings that are reported on in your staff report. So with all those considerations and movements in design, this is where we've landed with the site plan for the project. It's 16 developed lots, single-family lots, 8 of them having ADUs as a integrated component of the structures, attached ADUs. The red lots highlighted here are the ones that would have the accessory dwelling units, ADUs. They're the ones that front on Robin and Paradise, as well as Lot 13. And then the lots shown in blue are the single-family homes exclusively. And these are those hillside homes that I talked about that do the step up into the grade. There are 3 other parcels, three other lots identified with this subdivision, and they're identified in green as open space area A, B, and the upper area. All 3 of those are identified as open space, will be recorded as such in the tentative map, subdivision map, when it is recorded, and also for the project conditions ensure that that will remain as open space in perpetuity, which achieves a couple of things. It contributes to open space in town, maintains the open corridors, the wildlife corridors that already exist, and they also overlap significantly with some of the sensitive habitat areas that they were striving to protect. This graphic also identifies the additional parking that's provided for the occupants of the ADUs, as well as guest parking for the site. So there would be minimal anticipation of parking along Robin Drive. All of it is self-contained, as well as I said, with guest parking as well. The primary units would be parking in garages and driveways on the properties themselves. Let me step back here for a second. So just to highlight the conditions, I mentioned the one about preserving open space in perpetuity. We also have several conditions associated with the accessory dwelling units to help align this development program with what's called for and anticipated in the housing element, in that those ADUs would contribute to diversifying our housing portfolio and options in town, and trying to at least provide for moderate or workforce housing in the community. This is a image taken up from the Tiburon area of the development, and just looking at that lower pad site with the story pole, so you can see again the concentration in that valley on either side of the watercourse. Looking at the architecture and site design or individual property design here, we have 6 different unit types associated with the lots, the 16 lots. There are really 3 different types. 2 that deal with the properties that are not Lot 16, and the distinction between those 2 is just whether or not there's an accessory unit involved or not, and then there's different sizes within those 2 broad categories. So like type A and B generally are designed the same way, they're just slightly different in size, that's the biggest distinction, although there are some minor tweaks built in. But you have 2 typologies that involve the accessory dwelling units, and they're shown here with a third that is that Unit 13, a slightly larger version still. What we see in the building layout, we'll look at interiors first, is a real separation. First off, the ADUs have their own independent access. They're 1-bedroom units, and they're also fully attached and integrated to the structure. They're not distinguishable in architecture or quality from the primary units. They enjoy similar open space access. There's patios provided for the ADUs as well as the open space that's provided, outdoor space that's provided for the primary units. The floor plans show that the primary units' common areas are abutting the ADUs, so they're trying to maximize the privacy with the units. So where possible, the bedrooms from the primary units are separated from the ADUs. Then moving to the exterior, and I'll just mention they all have two-car garages, so the parking is provided for the primary units on site. The exteriors involve, as you can see with the material boards, which we can circulate around, high-quality materials, a variety of different materials that add articulation to the buildings. They've incorporated varying depths and accent features to the actual physical structures themselves to, again, create visual appeal, break up mass, and just create intricate buildings. They borrow from the aesthetic established at the preserve apartment complexes, although they bring it to a single-family context, much more articulation, much more design attention because of the finer grain of development needed in this subdivision. We have, again, accent features like this wood screening that addresses some of the issues with access to light and also privacy, and again breaking up broad expanses of mass to again create a softer fabric. What you can see in the elevations as well is clearly sides that are oriented towards the private views or the primary views that are anticipated to be enjoyed. So you see bigger windows to take in those views, and then where those larger windows would be looking on properties downhill, there's a specific treatment on the windows there to minimize privacy impacts on the downhill properties within this subdivision. This is a quick look at the single-family version, again showing those three stories to the structure and stepping into the hillside. This is just elevation cutting or sections cutting across the development. This is a look at Paradise Drive, Robin Drive, and lots 4, 5, and 6. The elevation drawn down here, just to see the relationship between the lots, the Paradise Drive, this preservation of landscaping here, and separating lot 6 and 7 from the waterfront properties down here. Staff, in analyzing this, identified and listed a condition of approval on this project to take a closer look at lot 6 and 7 and their orientation and try to bring them closer to the proposed private road here, which would add greater separation from the downhill properties on the waterfront, allow more landscaping along Paradise Drive to improve its scenic qualities and also enhance some of the privacy from these properties looking down. So that's included as a project condition and discussed in your packets. This is a quick elevation showing the lots 1 through 3 and 8 through 12. Just again showing the relationship between the buildings and the care that was taken in the placement of the windows and the interaction between the structures. There's another condition 56 that staff identified included in your packets for these facades which have their garage prominent. We have general plan policies that promote more active building frontages, and so we added a condition to articulate those garages a little bit more and reduce their appearance. This is a quick overview of the landscaping or the overall landscaping for the lower site. The upper portion is going to be retained in its natural state, although there will be some remediation for removing invasive species and such. Some of the materials and the types of plantings are shown here and discussed in your staff report. There's 8 lampposts associated with the private road, and we have project conditions to ensure those are dark sky compliant, as well as all other lighting on the site will be dark sky compliant. The landscaping is divided into these 6 biomes depending on what area is being treated. It's dividing out the landscaping into these functional elements and assigning plantings associated with those areas, and that's shown in the landscape plan and discussed in your staff report. The project is also conditioned to address an existing site distance issue at the Robin Drive and Paradise Drive intersection, as well as to contribute towards the Paradise Drive improvements, which we have our Public Works Director here to talk about in more detail.
Thank you, Chair Chase and Milan. That's a tough act to follow. Nice job on that presentation. I was enthralled up to this point. So I wanted to go over for the commission and the members of the public just briefly. I think we have 4 slides to kind of talk about what's happening from a transportation standpoint. I'm sure you're all aware of the need for transportation improvements in the corridor. Recently, staff came to council and talked about kind of 3-phased approach to improvements along Paradise Drive. The first phase is the one that pertains, at least proximally, to this location. So we're calling it a multimodal safety enhancements with the addition of bike lanes from Ring Mountain Trailhead to Robin Drive. It also involves narrowing the travel lanes, improving school access and pedestrian crossings. And I'll go briefly over some of the other improvements as well. So phase 1, here's Ring Mountain, here's the proposed development that we're discussing today. This is the area that is the top priority for town staff in terms of doing a complete streets project. We're also doing a sidewalk enhancement out here between San Clemente and Seawolf. And a third phase, a needed phase, is enhanced bicycle and pedestrian and vehicular safety in the center of the corridor. But to zoom in on phase 1, kind of list out the project benefits. You can read those as easily as I can, but here's the proposed development here. Milan was discussing kind of one of the immediate concerns is realigning the curb lines here and the site distances so that we have improved vehicular access to and from the property. It also kind of depicts improved bicycle lanes in both directions, or at least new bicycle lanes, as well as kind of this pedestrian pathway that is on the south side of Paradise Drive, proposed from Robin Drive, a contiguous pedestrian pathway all the way to the Ring Mountain Trailhead. And then what you see in the green dashed is kind of where the bike lanes would be crossing travel lanes. So in other words, that kind of dash treatment tells both cyclists and drivers to be aware that there's potential conflicting movements. And just kind of zooming in on this same little 1-block area, you can kind of see this proposed rapid flashing beacon pedestrian crossing on Paradise Drive here, as well as a new crossing at Up and Away. And then this, again, goes all the way to the Ring Mountain Trailhead. So This is just a concept. We hope to implement this in the next year or two, but we wanted the commission to be aware of our plans for improvements out there that are standalone and needed, but certainly tie well into the proposed development. So I'm happy to take any questions if the commission has any, or.
Thank you. I think we will avail you of your time up there and so forth. Phyllis, do you have any questions for Mr. Brown?
Not at this time.
All right, Dr. Bundy.
Yeah, Peter, one of the things that was talked about following a bike accident a year or two ago was to have either a flashing light or some type of light a little further out on Paradise as you're coming down the hill heading west that would indicate school and Robin Drive as sort of a description of the dangers that are ahead. Is that going to be a part of this?
Commissioner Bundy, I think that, again, this is a concept plan. I'm not familiar with that prior discussion, but I will say this in terms of one of the benefits of this particular proposal here is that the travel lanes go from about 11.5 down to 10 feet. And so that tends to slow traffic, as does this rapid flashing beacon. Anytime this is activated, vehicles in both directions will have to come to a stop. And so I know that this is a highly traveled corridor, and that certainly the demand for, say, like Marin Country Day School pickup and drop off drives a lot of the traffic. But in terms of cars entering the corridor from either the east end or the west end, I believe that this, as it's currently proposed, is going to really improve to slow vehicles and improve safety in the corridor. So.
Just going to really make a comment, though, that traveling west and coming down the hill, bicycles and cars can tend to be traveling too fast, and some may not be aware of all the congestion that they're about to encounter. That's what happened with the two bicyclists a year or so ago.
Understood.
Thank you, Bob. A couple of quick questions. Just to point out, or have you acknowledged the contribution that the applicant is making toward this Complete Streets program out there, and that somehow you'll design this along with other funding to create what you have in mind, or somebody's creating it on staff?
Yeah, we have about 5 partners on this corridor. So the applicant before you today, as well as a couple of the schools, the Transportation Authority of Marin is chipping in funds, some grant funds, and the town will come to the table for the difference. So this is a true partnership, including contributions from the applicant as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, in regards to the contribution, we have discussed and confirmed the contribution amount of $250,000, which would be associated specifically with the construction-related cost of the portion from up and away. From Upland to Robin Drive, or with the exception of the intersection at Robin Drive and Paradise Drive. So it's basically from the boundary line shown where Peter has his cursor on the right, which is going to be a CEQA funded or CEQA mitigation requirement, and then all the way down to the west, including a contribution to that crosswalk across Paradise Drive.
If I can just add quickly, we also met with Marin Transit and discussed the bus routes that come through here and the existing bus stop location. So at the time that this is implemented, that would also be evaluated, which would address, currently it's at Robin Drive. So it'll be analyzed to make sure that that's in the optimal location to provide the site distance and clearance around that curve.
So somehow that planning will be incorporated into a construction set of plans or into, okay. And is that, shall we would say, deemed needed to be complete by the end of project or beginning of project or anywhere along the line?
So the CEQA mitigation for the intersection at Robin Drive and Paradise would be required to be done prior to the completion of the project, or the first C of O associated with the Robin Drive project, this subdivision that we're discussing tonight. The other contribution, and the reason why it is a contribution is because it is dependent upon the town and other funding sources and our own schedule for completing the rest of that.
Okay. Just to point out today that I noticed that there was a significant decrease in speed as soon as a CMP officer parked there at the corner of Robin Drive and Paradise. It was noticeable. And also point out, just for, I can email it, but the drains at the bottom of the hill were plugged today across the thing, and you can take note of that. I'm sure you have a few of those. All right, thank you. All right.
So moving on to the environmental review, Christine Gaspar, if you want to come up.
Another guest appearance here. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you. I'm just going to talk to you briefly about the CEQA document and what we covered in there. There's going to be 3 items. First, I just wanted to briefly go over the environmental protection actions that have been incorporated as part of the project. These do feed into some of the analyses and the conclusions of less than significant, so we'll look at that briefly. Then we'll touch on the mitigation measures that have been added to reduce impacts to less than significant. And then the last item will be, we'll go over some changes and some insights that came out of circulation of the document and the comments that we received during that time. And you're good. So here are the environmental protection actions that are incorporated as part of the project. These are mostly just things that the applicant would have to do anyway. They're in the town's code or they might be in state law, but we put them here to recognize that they are being done. And they do influence the analysis, and also we'll put them over in the mitigation plan, so to make sure, give that extra extra box to check to make sure that, they do get done. And these are the mitigation measures that have been added to reduce impacts. And you can see the biggest one is biology, so it's really complex out there. There's 3 sensitive natural communities. There's several sensitive, several special status species. And the mitigation related to biology, reflects this and reflects the consideration that the town took when looking at these potential impacts and trying to balance the different things going on out there with the communities. And then there's some cultural resource and tribal resource mitigation. This isn't here because we thought that something would be found. It's just those measures that we have in case something is unearthed that was unexpected. And then one for noise during construction. It could be a little noisy and there's neighbors nearby, so we've got some items to address that. And then the last one got left off. That's okay. The line of sight ones, we have one in transportation. This is related to cars leaving Robin Drive and entering Paradise don't have the line of sight that they should under current standards. So this addresses that issue. So good news, we circulated the document and the CEQA process worked. We received comments back that helped us refine our mitigation and make it stronger. These comments came from the public and from a couple of agencies. And I would say that what also came to light through that process was that there was 2 items, oak woodlands and wetlands, that were found to be, impacts were found to be less than significant. And, oftentimes you might expect to see mitigation related to that. And the wetlands portion was explained pretty good, but the oak woodlands, not so much. I could have done a better job, and hopefully we've cleaned that up in the response to comments. But the wetlands were the impact of the wetland, or what we call stream 1 in the document, which is from the fill caused by the 2 weirs that the applicant is proposing. So that was determined to be less than significant. It's such a small amount. It wasn't going to influence the functionality of the wetland. And they were also increasing the size of the wetland upstream. And then they're also planning on, doing a little bit of restoration with the planting around the stream one. So all these things taken into consideration, we came to a conclusion of less than significance for that. The oak woodland, as I mentioned, I could have done a better job of explaining that in the CEQA document, but this came to less than significance again for a number of reasons. They were proposing to replant some oak trees. There's also going to be areas of existing oak woodland that would be preserved in the open space areas. So this counts towards, I want to say mitigating, but helping with the trees that would be removed as part of the project. And then there was also, we have removal of invasive species as a mitigation, and there was an assumption through that process that those areas that would be eradicated of the French broom would be allowed to either restore to needle grass, or you could plant oak woodlands in those areas. So again, all this taken into conjunction, the impact to oak woodlands was found to be less than significant. But with that said, we did beef up some of the mitigation measures and make it more obvious what the intent was with them. And you'll see that in the response to comments document. I feel like I'm forgetting something.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to point out the response to comments that Christine has been referring to is on page 305 of your staff report. I'm sorry, actually, that's on page 303 of the staff report. And it goes into a great amount of detail. We really, I think, took the comments about oak woodlands in particular, and worked and had several discussions not only with CDFW, which those comments and those discussions are ongoing, but also with, she's noted in the most recent letter from Renata Audubon Society, also met with them as well, discussed, I think, a much more thorough analysis of the different habitats on the site and where replanting could actually occur. And through that process, sort of, instead of identifying sort of a tree replacement ratio, I think Christine and GHD's biologist also recommended that we move to a more habitat replacement ratio, which was significantly bumped up to, I think, 3-to-1 from an oak woodland habitat standpoint. There's a helpful table on page 308 of the staff report, which I think talks about the existing oak woodland on the project site, which is 3.41 acres. The project would impact about 0.77 acres of habitat, leaving 2.64 acres undisturbed. And then it was determined it would be feasible to replant based on the areas of the site that were currently filled with invasive species or pine, that another 1.04 acres could be replanted with some oak woodland habitat. So so at the end of the day, there was an increase in oak woodland habitat from 3.41 acres to 3.68 acres.
And we chatted with CDFW about these numbers, and they've appreciated the work that we've done. And
Yeah.
those chats continue.
Yes, and they will continue.
All right, so Christine, what else would you like to say about the,
I think that was it.
okay. All right, so while you're here, commissioners, questions for Christine. Dr. Bundy, do you have any questions for her?
Was there any evidence of SOD in the area or infected trees? And are the replacement trees that are coming in, are they supposed to be more resistant to SOD?
Yes, there is SOD. That number slightly changed. There is a table in the response to comments that lists those. I think is it 11?
I think it was under 10, I believe, something like 6 or 8.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, seven, well, this isn't all the SODs though. This is just 7 of those that are being removed have sudden oak death. I think there's a total of 11 overall. And that's a good point about the new trees coming in. So unfortunately, coast live oak wouldn't be the best to plant out there. They would be susceptible to getting it as well. It would be better to plant oaks that are more resistant to it, like a blue oak. That would be a better choice.
Thank you.
And I feel like I missed another part.
That's
We're
the
good?
second
Okay.
half of that question, yes. Is that it, Bob?
Yeah.
Yes. Phyllis?
Yes, I was wondering, there is the formula for replacement of trees that are removed, but there are also the requirements now for fire safety. And less trees are preferred with close to developed structures. How are you going to balance those two needs to satisfy everyone?
Well, it's a very good point, and it's something that is challenging, and I think something that we're all going to have to think about more carefully. But that was one of the reasons why we brought Ruben into this process, and the applicant did as well early in the process, in talking about structures and proximity to trees, and what could be actually what needed to be removed, one. And then as well, though, I think Ruben, knowing sort of the other issue, the other side of this, and sort of the biological impacts, also, I think, looked at where it would be possible to actually save existing trees without having any fire safety repercussions or concerns. So, and Ruben, you can speak to that. You're here, so you may be able to speak to that further. But I think it is a balancing act. Obviously, we have a lot of different perspectives on the right approach here. And thanks, Ruben. If you want to add to that, by all means, now's a good time for that.
Yeah,
Up
please.
to-
Yes. You are.
I think there's a button at the bottom. Does that work? You can also.
I'll come sit up here. Thank you, Commissioner Chase and members of the commission. I first came involved with the project back in September of 2017 when we started working with Adam and they started submitting their original plans for landscaping. One of the difficult aspects that developers have is trying to understand the fire safety along with trying to have a comprehensive landscape plan. And so that's where we come in, and anytime there's any new development, we try to recommend what should be and shouldn't be done for the long-term life of the property. Not necessarily just for construction, but can they submit a vegetation management plan that'll reduce the fire risk without significantly impacting the environment. So the original round that came through in September of 2017 didn't meet the requirements for vegetation management plan. So we pushed back on it based on certain types of plant species that were involved, certain trees that were in proximity to the project. And then so they came back around, and it was in April of 2018 when they resubmitted their plan. Looked a lot better, still had 1 or 2 species on there that they needed to remove. However, that was going to be a condition of approval for the project. And one of them, for example, would be a manzanita, which is a native. However, tends to burn really well under a wildland environment. The other thing we looked at as well was how many trees were going to be removed, and the ones that are remaining, where are they in location to the structures, and what is going to be the maintenance plan of those trees. So not necessarily, when you start looking at defensible space around a structure, we look at anywhere between 100 to 150 feet of defensible space that basically will give that property an opportunity to be defendable in the event of a fire, or that increases their survivability in the event of a fire. And so what we do is, part of the maintenance is removal of all the underbrush, not necessarily clear cutting within that 100 to 150 feet. So if with a tree that's properly maintained and spaced away from a home, it does not significantly impact the survivability of that home. Some of the other things that, as the fire service has
conflict sometimes with tree replacements. We understand that we remove trees for fire safety, but yet within our codes and requirements for planning or CEQA, they're always giving us a number of replacement. And so we're always having battles, or not battles, but discussions with our local land planners. And so, but we try to do it in a comprehensive, common sense approach. So I had an opportunity in February 7th of this year to go out and visit with the applicants on site. We actually walked the entire site, looked at certain trees. We looked at where we can replace certain trees on site and where certain trees and certain tree species that were higher on the flammability phase for us as firefighters to have those removed. And so we played that happy balance as, okay, instead of removing that one, let's keep that one, but let's remove the pine tree.
Got it. So there is a page in the submitted plans, tree plan lower parcel that shows the trees removed, the new trees, and the existing trees.
Yes.
And that's where you're saying you've had the most impact in the planning of this. And I'll turn it over to the other commissioners in a moment, but essentially, you've only got 24-inch box trees, and it's these this particular the Circus canadensis. I don't know where those are planned in this plan. There's no key on the plan for where these trees go, but I would say then that you must be thinking the uphill side would be the less flammable trees, and down,
That is correct.
And then down around the stream is where oaks would go.
Yeah.
Presumably.
So we start looking at oak trees as, well, when we start looking in the realm of fire, everything burns. It's just some trees and some vegetation tend to burn a lot quicker and faster than other trees. And some other vegetation, some like oak trees, tend to survive better within fire. So we start looking at the species in particular. So for instance, if you're going to replant a tree, we recommend a tree that's less pyrophytic, basically less flammable. So if you're going to replant a tree, we recommend an oak tree versus a pine tree.
Yeah.
In relation to there, because we've seen throughout California that oak trees tend to survive. They may have a little freezing of the canopy, and then those leaves will die down and then regrow. Versus a pine tree, which is similar to, if you've ever seen a video of a Christmas tree burning, they burn pretty hot. And so that's what we started looking at.
We just saw a long video of that
Yeah.
in the fall. Commissioners, Phyllis, do you have any questions for Ruben?
Actually, it was my question that was being answered, so that takes
Okay.
care of it.
All right, Dr. Bundy.
Yeah, Ruben, thanks for the presentation. I know a lot of homes in the urban wildland interface are putting roof sprinklers on, which are manually controlled, and then would be turned on in the event of approaching fire. Is that something that has been recommended or considered in this project?
No, it hasn't, because it's been shown that it's not very effective in a wildland fire. What it is you end up pre-treating, say, either comp shingles or any type of roof material, that by the time the onslaught of the fire comes through, it's all evaporated. So what you're doing is you're spraying water and taking away from a resource that as firefighters we can use on the ground to actually extinguish the fire. The best thing that a homeowner can do or a developer can do is choose building materials that meet either the California Residential Code Section 337 or Chapter 7A of the California Building Code, which addresses exterior wildfire protection within the structure. So it's all about building materials and trying to prevent a lot of the amber intrusion within the structure, not necessarily exterior fire sprinklers.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob. So a couple of questions regarding the zones around the homes. There's a plan here that shows a distance around all of the structures that is recommended for maintenance and so forth. Is that a part of your job in this document to recommend that zone and so forth?
Yes. So
And then it doesn't go to the property line for vegetation management. It's just a distance around the structures. But is that just because you have a good building to say this is the zone rather than saying let's manage the whole property?
correct. So we start looking at either under the California Public Resource Code with 4291, which deals with any structures within the wildland urban interface, or within our locally adopted California Fire Code, Section 49072, It addresses anyone who owns, controls, or leases property within a wildland urban interface must maintain anywhere between 100 to 150 feet of defensible space, or up to their property line, whichever they get to first. The science out there has shown that anything more than about 150 feet is almost, its impact is less for defending a home, because the homes that are being impacted that already had their 150 feet of defensible space and they're igniting are being ignited by ember showers, not necessarily the vegetation around their house. So if every homeowner and developer would create that 100 to 150 feet, or to their property line, whichever comes first, it greatly reduces the impact of a wildfire coming through.
Great, okay, well, you
And so
made
when
it-
we start looking at, I think part of the question may have been to the entire parcel as a whole. For instance, the upper portion of the property, that's going to be undeveloped, which is private open space that abuts up against county open space and the Ring Mountain Open Space Preserve, there aren't any structures in that area that we need to defend.
Right.
So by eradicating everything and removing all the vegetation on that portion of the property, to us as a firefighter, doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Because you're not impacting anything per se.
Right, and just, we were talking about this earlier, there's also then, you have to overlay that with the biological side, and in that regard, there are mitigation requirements that remove it has sort of a
Yes.
beneficial effect, because it's about removing French broom on the upper parcel and other sort of invasive species on the upper parcel, but it's not a fire regulation.
It's more of a biodiversity
Yeah.
Right,
mitigation. Removing the invasives may increase that biodiverse area for the environment.
okay. In the event of a summertime fire, where that is dry out there, the environment around the creek bed, or so-called seasonal stream, is not going, it's gonna burn just like the rest of it.
Correct.
It's just gonna tear right up through either one.
Yeah, and then one of the things that this project is also doing, it's actually creating the fire safety for the homes that are up against the Tiburon Drive,
Right.
right above, because now they're removing a lot of the fuels underneath it, and also maintaining that property. So this vegetation management plan is not just for construction only.
Yeah.
It lives with the entire life of the property as a whole.
All right,
So in 30 years from now, we can come back and say, you need to return this property to its originally permitted state.
and do you do inspections annually out there, or around the county, or the,
Yes, we do.
yeah, okay, so every year this gets looked at?
Yeah, so every property within the wildland urban interface gets at least a drive-by, if not a knock on the door to kind of manage the property. And since these are rental properties and we're already out at the preserve anyway, we would comment on this property as well.
Got it, okay. Any other questions for Ruben? No, all right. Thank you, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think, I certainly have some questions for Christine, if she's able to return. Do the other commissioners have any questions for her?
I'll just add one thing
Yeah.
while Christine's getting set up is there was a comment about the construction materials and the importance of that for fire safety. So condition 106 in your packets is addressing that and requiring the structures. So we do have that incorporated into this project in particular. And 107, condition 107 deals with the vegetation management plan and making sure that that is submitted, updated, and reviewed by the fire marshal for
Right,
all the issues that he raised.
thank you, yeah, and that's the fire side of it and the keeping the site clean. The other side of it is this, the biome side of it, and so the Audubon Society letter asked for a biologist VMP, vegetation management plan. So just to be clear, is there some leap of protection or additional oversight from having a biological vegetation management plan versus a VMP? And, you know, in this case, what would be gained? I hope this is a short answer. And then a couple other things about this, but that's my first question, since it's in the comments, and I'm wondering, is that something you can respond to?
Well, I think the intent of the comment is actually addressed under a mitigation measure bio 4. which has conditions in there that for monitoring of the oaks that are planted and also monitoring of the eradication of the French broom.
Okay, so that standard vegetation management plan, really, in your opinion and how you've responded, is it takes care of that concern?
Well, the vegetation management plan is the one done for the wildland interface
Interface,
area.
right.
And then the Bio 4 is for, and it's not monitoring into perpetuity like the vegetation management plan is. It's just monitoring during the the period of establishment for the, planting of the new stuff and the eradication of the.
Is that period defined anywhere?
It is, yeah. So the oaks would get monitored for 10 years, every year for the first 5 years, then in year 7, and then in year 10. And if any time that oaks need to be replanted because they've died, the 10 years would start over.
Okay, that was one of my questions. Can you confirm whether or not the star tulip has been found out there? I see some reports that say it exists and some say it might be found, and there's habitat and all that. I'm not clear.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, so the applicant had their biologist do a survey in 2015, and it was found on the upper portion of the parcel. And then we reviewed that. It looked all good to us, but we said in the CEQA document, you know what, you should, before you start construction, it's been so long since that survey was done, habitat does exist for the star tulip down on the lower parcel. Before you begin construction, make sure it hasn't migrated down there. So we've asked that that be looked at.
So given that,
And a biologist has to go out and do that,
okay,
yeah.
hypothetically, if this were approved by council and so forth, if we recommend approval or not, so council says go forth, does the clock start at that time? Can they send a biologist out at that time? Say it's spring. So can that occur?
Right, they need to send it out during the bloom period for that particular species, which is in the spring.
Because we can't really wait a year for another biology report. That by then the site will.
You need to get out there right now and do that.
Right. Okay. So a question about the so-called wetlands out there. When I walked that property, it appears that the old site grading has essentially created a low flow of water, call that a wetlands. And that's what I see out there is that a stream bed that is low slope and it's filled with water now. Is that the definition of the wetlands now out there?
Yeah, I happened to go out in the summer, so it was completely just
Right.
dry, and a good chunk of it was bare earth.
I mean, the wetlands is defined in how the town defines it. We've been through this before. Is by the actual Army Corps delineation, and so we have that map that is part of the CEQA document, and it is really the stream area.
Yeah, the core one is the stream 1, and then the state is stream 1 and what's referred to as
I
stream
got
2.
it. Okay.
Yeah, for
Right.
some reason the Corps didn't take jurisdiction on the lower part.
Yeah, all right. And, I don't know, FYI, what I saw today was that debris guard had been overflown with water at some point in the last 48 hours. It wasn't clogged, but there was debris deposited on top of that, and the grasses uphill were pushed down by water flow, probably 20 feet wide in some places up there. So I'm presuming that the drainage guys in the town are aware of how much water will come off of that hill. It's coming off now, but it's going to be focused. a little bit more.
And I think it's important to note that the applicant in designing this, well, that was one of the significant constraints that they looked at in terms of the placement of the structures was to not obviously build within that wetland area. Yeah.
So I think the bridge is the necessary relief for that, because that thing gets there's a lot of water coming down that hill. Okay. Any other questions for Christine? No. All right. Thank you.
Let's try to really quickly, I think, we want to get to everybody else here and the applicant, but we will try to really quickly wrap up. Milan, go ahead.
So this is discussed, the next two slides are meant to pick up on the CEQA discussion on the tree laws, but and it's discussed in your staff report in that staff engaged proactively with the applicants who were a willing partner in trying to address this, reduce the amount of tree loss, even though it had been identified as less than significant in the CEQA document. And through that process, they explored potential site plan revisions to the plan that we currently have in front of us. And at a conceptual level, there are a couple of adjustments shown in this conceptual drawing for placing lots 6, 7, 8, and 13 in a slightly different orientation that would remove them or place them further from trees that needed to get removed in the current plan. So there are some tweaks that can happen, and then as you can see, I mentioned earlier with lots 6 and 7, we mentioned conditions to push those off of Paradise Drive, so this has that dual function of serving that as well. I think the applicant can speak to that in more detail, but again, it's mentioned in your staff report. So we've tried to address this tree loss issue from multiple perspectives to make sure that we were doing as much as possible. So in terms of process for the actual entitlement package, we have 6 different entitlements kind of embedded within this whole package, starting with the zoning amendment, which would be to remove the HLC overlay and replace it with a planned development overlay on the site. That enables the rest of the project to cascade through with the planned development. So with the planned development overlay, it allows the clustered development, which is expressed within the preliminary plan, effectuated by the tentative map, and then presuming that those are well thought out and designed for the space, we have a precise plan and design review, which would add in all the details. This is a package that's coming to you all in one, so that all of these phases are built in to the whole package that you have. So the zoning amendment, as I said, is moving from HLC to the PD overlay. Although this transition is happening, the project incorporates the development density that would be allowed under HLC. It does not add additional density, so it's functionally serving within as if the HLC was there. The site analyses that are required with HLC have been conducted, the geotechnical analysis and so forth. The plan development includes adjustments to development standards on the site, again, to allow for that cluster development. So some of the setbacks are adjusted, the lot frontages are adjusted, and those are all detailed, again, within your staff report. A couple of other adjustments are also requested. I mentioned them earlier, which is the waiver of that owner occupancy requirement and bringing into this site the inclusionary, the adjustment to how the inclusionary calculations are made, and that's just carrying it forward from the housing element. The tentative map is just reflecting what the preliminary and plan development describe, and then the precise plan and design review address the architecture and the full detailing of the structures on the site. Just to give you a quick window as to why the plan development is necessary here, it allows for, this overlay allows for adjustments to the base zoning's development standards, so that R1 zoning's development standards for the site. Allows for some flexibility for addressing unique conditions on sites. This was specifically designed for a project or a property like the one that we're facing, with a number of different constraints, where there is a desire to see housing development there, but a challenge in trying to get all of that to happen on that site. The PD, like other overlays, allows development standards to be modified, but goes a little bit further in that it allows for the other adjustments that are necessary here, which is that owner occupancy adjustment in particular. And you have exhibits within your staff report that highlight exactly what is being asked to be modified within the development standards. This table, I think, is the best one that illustrates that. So looking at the lot width at the front setback, some of the front yard distances, some of the structures are being brought close to that private road, closer than what's anticipated in R1. And then where we have some of the smaller lots on Robin Drive, between Robin Drive and the private road, the rear yard also needs to get reduced. So yes, that's an important note. So one of the things is, this is a cluster design. It's a unique site. The plan development was necessary, but the applicant has tried to minimize the amount of deviation from those base development standards. So height is consistent with the current zoning. In particular, lot sizes are all consistent. Floor area ratios are all consistent with current zoning. None of those are being asked to be modified. Coverage as well. Finally, just linger a little bit on the ADUs. So we talked about them from a structural perspective, but programmatically, again, the housing element anticipated ADUs on this site to provide that housing diversity and somewhat affordability in the town. The ADUs range in size from 660 or so square feet to just under 750 square feet. Staff has spent a considerable amount of time looking at both the existing policies that we have locally and why ADUs were anticipated to contribute to housing in the way that they were expected to contribute. The housing element cites a number of different surveys that were done within this region and looked at ADUs and what they do for housing, what kind of housing product they provide. We analyzed all of that. We also analyzed, as you might be aware, there's been a number of studies recently trying to catch up with some of the ADU legislation that we've seen and try to understand really what ADUs do contribute to a community. And we've looked at some of the research that's been done, particularly out of the Turner Center at UC Berkeley, which did a much broader survey to try to understand, with the owner occupancy waiver, what potential implications there might be, and whether or not this project, which does not include conditions on affordability at any specified level, whether or not that would play out in a way that would still serve the intent of the housing element and the desire of the town from a policy perspective. Staff feels that given the size of the units, the fact that they are incorporated within the development, the fact that they are part of those structures, that they will be affordable by design. They will contribute to diversifying the housing stock in the area, in the town. And so we have not included a condition requiring, for example, deed restrictions on ensuring affordability over any specified period of time. However, we have included 3 very particularly tailored conditions for this project that ensure that these units are made available to the types of households that were anticipated in the housing element. So particularly, we have an affirmative marketing strategy which ensures that the availability of these units is notified to those types of households. They have access to them. The affirmative marketing strategy includes a priority to the extent possible within housing regulation to allow moderate and workforce households to have access to those units above others. We include a condition that prevents an individual family from renting both units and using both units for just that one family's purposes. So it encourages separate households to occupy those units. And we also include an annual reporting requirement. One of the big challenges is that we do not know what exactly is happening with the ADUs in Corte Madera. It's not a Corte Madera issue. This is pretty consistent. Most people don't have that reporting in place. And so with this project, we will know the income levels of the households there and whether or not this approach, which is novel, is achieving the intent of the housing element and addressing housing needs in the community. Anything to add? So we did receive a number of different public comments through the formal noticing periods and afterwards. Staff went to each one of the sites that had reached out and expressed concern about the development. The first being 5156 Paradise Drive. I hope I got that number right. I don't have it right in front of me, but directly across from lots 6 and 7 on the other side of Paradise. The concern was about privacy from lots 6 and 7, which are obviously oriented to look towards this property or over this property towards the bay and east. And so you can see from this window the shot of the story poles and where they're located. And it's just one of the reasons why we included that condition to push these buildings closer to that private road and move them further away. But it's important to note that these are the story poles for the roof lines. So under normal circumstances, you wouldn't see an individual hanging out on the roof. And so the actual view angles is lower than what these story poles suggest. The other concern we had was from the property at 15 Cibrian. This is from a site visit that we did there, looking at where the property is situated in relationship to the interior and the outdoor spaces enjoyed by that property. And this section from the project plans indicates why we felt that there was not a significant impact of views and privacy for this property. The main reason being that all of the development is below the property, and the outside spaces associated with particularly lots 11 and 12, which are the ones that immediately are adjacent to this property, They're small, they're not outdoor spaces where you'd see a lot of congregation frequently. And again, the building and all the views and outdoor spaces are more oriented towards the west and north for the bay and Mount Tam views. We also received a comment just today about expanding on some previous comments regarding the tree loss and the siting of Lot 16. So we have this photo just showing, you can barely see it, but that's one of the story poles for Lot 16. The building would span kind of this general area within that identified oak woodland, but as Christine had elaborated, we found a less than significant impact there. And overall, the project is preserving oak habitat in perpetuity and increasing the amount of acreage dedicated or available to oak habitat. So I'll just touch on the general plan consistency at a high level. All the findings are detailed in your staff report. But for the reasons cited here, staff feels we can make the recommendation to approve the resolutions in your packet. This project successfully implements the housing program for the site, and by incorporating the cluster design, achieves the 16 units, not the 15. So we have additional housing provided through this cluster design. The project is designed and it's also conditioned to ensure that the affordable housing or the housing that's provided contributes to the affordable housing goals stated in our policy documents. We have general improvement to circulation and safety associated with circulation, both through the contribution of the trail, which I have not touched on but is detailed in your staff report. The informal trail that currently exists on the upper parcel will be made available to the County of Marin to incorporate within their trail network as an option. The reason why we had to formulate it that way is the county is evaluating its trail network and deciding whether or not this would be important to include. So they have that option available, and that would formalize that trail and ensure access to Ring Mountain. It's well designed, it's compatible with the adjacent neighborhood, it provides a nice transition from the low density single families in Tiburon to the apartment complexes, creates that buffer, and again at the scale of the actual development itself is well articulated and well thought out to create an attractive living environment. And it protects the natural resources to the maximum extent possible, recognizing all of the balancing that has to happen with the competing demands on the site and the development. And finally, it incorporates to the maximum extent possible the safety and fire risk mitigation in its design. So these are a listing of all the findings that, again, are detailed in your staff report for the zoning amendment to implement generally a zoning amendment and then specifically to bring in a PD overlay on this site. Within the plan development, you have specific findings that just at a base must be made in order for a plan development to be considered, but then further for a preliminary plan to be implemented, we have additional findings. This conceptual plan that I mentioned earlier is provided at a conceptual level. It has not been fully vetted. So we feel that it has the bones to still meet all of the findings, but I bring it up here because it is locating those structures on those lots in a slightly different orientation, so it may impact that table you saw with the setbacks and whatnot. But generally speaking, staff sees that this could be a viable solution and still be able to meet those findings. We also have findings for the tentative map to subdivide the property, which are consistent with local ordinance and the California Subdivision Map Act, and it's been fully evaluated against both of those. And we are able to make all of the design review findings for the structures proposed on this property. So our staff recommendation, again, to reiterate, is to adopt resolutions 1907 through 19-10, and they are the ones recommending to Town Council approval and adoption of the zoning amendment, the plan development and preliminary plan, the tentative map, the precise plan, and the design review for the project.
Well said, if I may say so. So it's a mouthful.
So much for our half hour. Sorry.
But no, it's all good with the contributing consultants to get through this, so it's important. Phyllis, questions?
Yes, and thank you for that very concise report. It really was informative. I want to ask something having to do with the ADUs. One of the things that concerns me with the state law is the fact, and especially when there's federal money put in, that you've got to reach out, I think, to the 9 Bay Area counties to let them know there's going to be availability within certain income ranges. Is there any type of further restriction we can put on this, on these? I know there are only 8 units, but limited to people working within Corte Madera or within a certain mileage proximity, considering we're right on the Tiburon border and we have such small towns, that we could do that? Or if we cannot limit the 8 units, at least give first consideration. I would like to see the teachers who are working at the schools, I would like to see the people who are working within town center and the village be able to find a place, and it not only gives them affordable housing, it also helps the environment by getting them off the road.
And I would just piggyback on that, it was like, can public employees get a first option or otherwise?
Yeah.
That's the question, so.
So
That's
we'll partially defer to the applicants as part of their presenting. The challenging mechanism, as you know, first of all, there are no federal funds in here that
So they
that
don't
allow-
have to.
So they don't have to do these kinds of things. We can't make them do these kinds of things. There's also the federal housing under FEHA restrictions and constraints so that we don't discriminate. So what the applicant will, and you can certainly hold your questions for them, is they have actually volunteered a targeted marketing program very similar to what's presented and required in our housing element for inclusionary units. And they'll speak to that. It is, so to the extent that they're offering that targeted marketing, and their program is a voluntary, the town can condition the project based on what they're offering. And so you may want to reserve your questions and to see whether or not their proposal meets what your intent is.
And I shall ask them too about that.
All right, Phyllis, anything else for
No, that's it.
Dr. Bundy? Okay. I think that was my nexus of the availability of it, and how is it possible to set levels of income availability, or is that strictly up to the applicant?
I can speak to that. I think it is possible to do so. As I think Milan mentioned, we've done in our evaluation, we think it's not advisable. We didn't think that was necessary to do so. For the reasons Milan mentioned, but also, we have ADUs throughout town. I understand this may be a unique project in certain respects, but we don't currently deed restrict other ADUs in town. That's one reason. These are of certain size. I think that's another important consideration that we looked at. And so when you look at the bedroom mix and 1 bedroom, 1 bath, compared to some of the other ADUs we've seen recently, we actually didn't think that would be appropriate. But also there isn't a real clear, I think, evidence in the research that there is a real clear correlation between owner occupancy and or having renters, and actually achieving any sort of or differing affordability. That was sort of at the end of the day. But nonetheless, I think that is a valid question to bring up and raise, and one certainly that could be part of a recommendation from the commission. But it also the other important thing, and I think from a larger policy standpoint, I will just say from my perspective, we are achieving some good success in actually getting more ADU applications and more ADUs built in town. I do have a concern that if we start putting in, again, I'm talking about larger issues, that we do start putting deed restrictions on ADUs, we're going to get less folks who actually want to build those things, because obviously that has a significant bureaucratic or additional requirements put on, and monitoring and et cetera, lots of requirements on an ongoing basis, which may be easier for an apartment developer and manager, but certainly not easy for a homeowner or others who may want to do the same.
Got it. That's answered effectively. Thank you. All right. So, shall we turn it over to this wonderful group of people that have come here to?
Excuse me,
Yeah.
may we have a 5-minute break after more than an hour and a half?
Okay. Yeah, we can take a short break.
A short
but we're going to start here again in
5
7
minutes.
minutes
Okay.
at 8:45. So that's that.
So nice, so nice.
Hello again. We're going to start this, and we're going to get underway, and we're going to hear the lovely presentation from the applicant next.
Wait,
So,
Maybe you let the public know when they get.
yeah, so as soon as the applicant is done, if we don't have, I hope we don't have serious questions, then we'll get to public comment as soon as we may. So, thank you for your patience, and so far, we've gotten a lot of information out the door, and now we get to hear the meat of the matter, so, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners and staff. I'm Patty Schwader. I'm Senior Vice President of AIMCO. We own the Preserve at Marin and this property that we're talking about tonight. We're going to tag team as well, and we'll have about an hour and a half presentation, if that's okay. We'll just go through yours again. I'm here with Rich Hawthorne, our Senior VP of Redevelopment in California, Derek Ulian, who's our project lead for development. He's in California as well, and an architect, Duke McClarty, who's on my team of Director of Government and Community Relations, and Riley Hurd, our zoning attorney. So we're going to try not to repeat everything that you already heard, but first I do have to thank Adam, Milan, Judith, and the rest of the folks. This was probably, I work in 48 states, this was probably the most detailed and wonderful staff report I've heard. I might not have said that in the 31 months that we have been working on this since we last saw you, and maybe the 2 years before that. But I got to tell you, you put us through our paces. It was rigorous, and I think we've got a better project to present to you tonight. So, Riley, you're driving here. A little refresher on who's AIMCO. We're one of the largest operators and owners of apartments in the country. We're a public company now in our 25th year. We're a long-term owner of apartments. We have 2,600 apartment homes in the Bay Area. We're not a fix and flipper. We are a fix and stay, and we try and be part of the community. We have a philanthropic program called AIMCO Cares. Here's an event we did in your area recently, and we're professional. We're an on-site management company. We care about our residents, we care about quality, we care about service, and we care about the community. So a little background, you heard a lot of it from Milan. What you probably didn't hear is that we bought Preserve at Marin, which was then known as Madeira Vista, in 2011, and we invested over $125 million to remodel all of the 26 apartments, all the grounds, including a whole new amenity center, dog parks, you name it. And guess what? They're all filled. In 2013, we acquired the surrounding 15 acres, which is what we're talking about tonight. The previous owner, we learned, actually at one of our first resident meetings, had planned to do a development of nearly 300 units. And when we presented this to the community the first time, they looked at us and said, okay, so where's the rest of it? We'll show you where the rest of it is. Instead of the 300 units, I think it was maybe 280, we decided to do what you wanted to do. And we looked at the housing element, and as Milan said and Adam said, it said that you're to facilitate the development of the Robin Drive property as a high potential housing site. So what are we doing? We wanted to implement the housing element by providing homes in ADUs, which we've already talked about, no change in density, clustering the homes away from neighbors and sensitive areas, using a PD, high quality, beautiful, sustainable community. We heard loud and clear some of those concerns and requests of yours the last time we were here. Fulfilling the town's commitment to the housing obligations and community benefits. We talked about that a little bit. Preservation of open space, Paradise Drive multi-use pathway. We're offering a up to $250,000 contribution to get that going. And Ring Mountain Public Access Trail with an expanded landing are just some of the few benefits of this project. So what's new in the 31 months? I'm older, you're maybe not, but what did we do? We relocated the house on the hill. We are providing an open space easement to ensure future development. We moved the Paradise Drive homes further from the road. This is what we heard from many of the neighbors, that it's too close, and I think Adam and Milan talked about that. You said at the last meeting that you did want enhanced sustainability measures, and we thought we were doing pretty well then, but we took another look and added some more, and there's some slides dealing with that later in our 2-hour presentation. We conducted a review of the existing trees, and we'll save 85 trees and plant 121 trees. And I got to thank the fire marshal for his help and work on this project to really strike that balance between a beautiful woodland natural area and one that actually is going to stay that way and not burn down in the foreseeable future. We're implementing mitigation measures, and Milan talked about those: light, air quality, noise, traffic. Everybody's talking about the traffic safety issues with the 2 schools across the street, and we're taking, I think, a good step to mitigate those. Construction management plan. We heard from the neighbors that maybe we were a little noisy the last time we did this, but we have a new sheriff in town. His name is Rich Hawthorne, and we have a construction management plan that I think is very detailed, including a disturbance monitor, which is something I'd never heard before. I might apply for the job if I don't do well tonight. And so we plan to focus very, very carefully on construction management and how we treat our neighbors. A little different this time is that we have our own residents. Last time we had nobody. And you can be sure that we're our own best neighbor, and we will be carefully trying to mitigate any impacts from the construction because we'd like to keep those 126 units full. We've also developed a marketing strategy for ADUs. I'm going to talk about that in a second. You asked about that earlier. We work directly with affected neighbors, having several community meetings, talking with neighbors directly. And our own residents said, hey, we got a lot of kids here, you need a playground. And you requested that as well, so we're adding that to the plan. So what about the second units and ADUs? You talked about that a lot earlier. I'm going to add my 2 cents on it as well. Obviously, they're 8 units, average size 700 square feet. They're affordable by design, as Milan said, and the research shows. It is a unique product, not only for the town and the county, but for us. The Preserve at Marin does not have any 1-bedrooms. It does not have any units that are at this price point, this much lower price point. So this is unique even for our own little development. Units are going to be marketed to workforce employees. That's our goal, including police officers, firefighters. Commissioner Metcalf, you mentioned teachers. Wouldn't it be cool to be a teacher who could walk across the street or walk next door or take a bike down the road to one of the schools, and nurses? We have a very expert marketing team. We're in the business of attracting residents all over the country, so we know how to do this. And they will be working very hard with direct community outreach, all the tools that marketing has today, including social media, print ads, digital, et cetera, to attract those. And as Milan and Adam said, there are some very unique conditions in here. We've never heard of them before, but we're excited to give them a try, and that is that they cannot be occupied by the same household. We have a reporting requirement, and we're going to be trying very hard to make sure that the town meets its affordability requirements and that we do what we said we'd do. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rich.
Thank you, Patty.
Hello, Chairman. How are you, as well as the commissioners? Rich Hawthorne, as Patty said, I run the real estate development and construction arm of AIMCO for the Western United States, specifically focused on California, and obviously up in the Bay Area here. We conducted several outreach meetings to the neighbors and residents, 3 of them specifically that were called out by Milan, Adam. And some of the questions that were brought up, we've directly addressed. Traffic, what would the traffic be like along Robin and Paradise? And it's largely imperceptible. We've done a number of studies, and we've We've looked at how parking would be associated on those roads, and it's going to be contained within, fully contained within the site. Each home having 2 parking spaces fully contained as garages, and second units being provided their own parking as well as 7 dedicated spots along the parcel. Rear fences, the question was brought up. There's no rear yard fences on the project. Existing water course, another one, the water course is going to be maintained in its present location. Existing tree preservation, you guys went over that in detail. So the design achieves the density of the housing element, and it also preserves a maximum amount of the existing trees. Continuing on, density along Paradise Drive, we talked a little bit about that. Originally there was more houses conducted. We reduced that down, and we relocated one of the houses into the clustered parcel. So there's less density on Paradise. Amenities that are existing today. I think we not sure if we went over all of them, but we have our own pool and fitness center and open spaces that will be available to our customers in our single-family homes as well as the ADUs. The Ring Mountain Trail will be maintained for public use with an easement, and it will be maintained in its current location. Construction management, this is a critical component. We've developed a comprehensive construction management plan, specifically addressing noise, dust, pollution, disruption, mitigating traffic, on-site parking, and containing that within the confines of the construction zone. And I can assure you that will be maintained so that we're not impacting our neighbors, including our own residents. This shows the existing sort of conditions of the site. We talked about the lower area and the upper area, and Milan did a great job with that. It's a classic infill location. On the left, you'll see the high-density preserve mid-rise buildings, and on the right, you'll see the low-density single-family. So this is a nice transitional site between the higher density and the lower density. And it's a prime location for much-needed housing. And again, the upper portion, which is not shown, is going to remain in its natural state with some improvements. The existing R1 zoning for the site did not exactly work, and we worked a lot with Milan and Adam on this. But what it did allow for, and here I want to explain, here's why it didn't work. The buildings would have been located in environmentally sensitive areas and along the neighboring property lines. The road grading resulted in significant retaining wall and retaining wall heights in the original zoning. It allowed homes up to 8,690 square feet. It removed vegetation and buried storm drainage. No common developed area for storm retention. It impacted the natural riparian corridor. It increased the removal of oak trees, and it limited the ability to have open space. What we've done in our proposed development, and you've seen a lot and heard a lot of it, but we concentrated the buildings away from the neighbors in environmentally sensitive areas. We limited road grading. The average home size is only 2,760 square feet, which is 2/3 smaller than what is allowed. It provides setbacks from jurisdictional watercourses, greatly improved site drainage, retention of more trees, proposes oak canopy best management practices, and it reduces site grading and retaining wall heights, and again provides large preserved open space. This slide really illustrates the benefit of the plan. We did this to really sort of show you the large parcel in the upper and the lower, and of note, it's 15.42 acres. The disturbed area is only 3.1, or 20% of the area. The impervious area is only 1.7 acres, or 11% of the total site, and the total building footprint is only 0.77 acres, or 5% of the site, resulting in a density of just over 1 dwelling unit per acre, which is near agricultural recreational zoning. Now I will turn it over to my colleague Derek to finish up.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Derek Yulian. This kind of zones more into the lower portion of the site, highlighting the clustered approach and the beautiful landscaping that we've taken to really uplift the overall site. You can also see along lots 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, the vegetative screening that goes along between our Tiburon neighbors. Off to the right, you see some renderings of the architectural style, that modern California bay, with different materials that you can see over here on the material board, all that comply with the codes that Ruben had mentioned earlier about fire safety. Natural woods, stuccos, glass, natural textural materials. This is the alternative plan that Milan and Adam had mentioned. We took this a little bit further with the shifting of buildings 7, 13, and 8. We could essentially save 3 coastal live oaks, but that would mean that we would require additional standard deviations, excess FAR, relief from height, increased setbacks, decreased minimum lot size, all stuff that we don't require under our existing approach. If this is something you would like us to further explore, we can do so. We've met with our neighbors up in Cibrian. This actually off to the right here is a rendered view from the living room of 15 Cibrian Drive, showing the actual view of the site laid in to the area with the vegetative screening. We heard some comments and some questions about sort of the overall roof plan of the site, but you don't actually see the property ever from up above. You only see it from this angled vantage point. And you can see that you see our apartment buildings in the back, but not so much the new project here in the front. We also are installing anti-reflective PV that's integrated into the standing seam metal, which is different than overlaying the photovoltaics right on top. We have some examples over here under the material board for review. This sort of talks back to that R1 zoning. These are the actual setbacks from the property line at Tiburon. We could go all the way up to 25 feet from that property line, but we're going setback 63 to 92 feet. Average setback is about 81 feet, as shown here on this diagram. And then Milan touched on this with this overall section, but you can sort of see the homes up on Cibrian Drive and how it steps down to our project. There was some concern about contrast being an issue with the site plan, the white stucco and sort of the woods and the natural material. But as you can see here, the single facade rear elevations of lot 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 are all planned to have the natural wood feel and look that integrates in with that vegetative screening, further blending it in with the overall site. Sustainability with this project, we'll be seeking LEED certification or higher. We're maintaining 89% of the entire site to be pervious. 10.75 acres are preserved open space in perpetuity. And sun shading devices, downlighting and dark sky compliance, and non-reflective solar panels integrated into the standing seam metal roofs. In summary, this project provides much needed housing to fulfill 50% of the town's ADU commitment for affordable housing, preserves 10.75 acres of open space in perpetuity, donate $250,000 to the Robin Drive Road Improvement Project, grants a public access easement to the trail on the open space, and mitigates fire risk with maintained site landscape. We have a short video on the next slide that's a fly-through of the overall project to give a better context for the overall site. This is coming off Paradise up Robin. This will go the wrong way. This will go the wrong way up the private drive, but going up the hill gave a better perspective of the overall community than coming down the actual private drive. You can see the additional ADU parking over to the left and the guest parking. You can see the articulation of the architecture in the homes with the mix of the stucco, the stone, and the wood elements. See the relief that the facades give with the different undulations and movement in the facade, so it's not a giant wall of architecture. Careful consideration has been given to window placement and the overall structures. You're coming up here on the bridge that goes over the existing watercourse and riparian corridor to make sure that the natural site's watercourse is maintained. And then it'll spin around and sort of zoom out of the overall site, giving you that aerial view of the entire project. Thank you.
Very good. All right. What else do you guys want to say about the project? That's it. All right. Questions? Yes. Phyllis, questions for the AMCO?
Well, just to follow up about the ADU with the marketing plan, could emphasis be put on people who work in town or within a certain mileage proximity to the project itself, that they get first dibs?
I think that's a legal question, and as we talked earlier, fair housing question. But our marketing plan will target people who live in town directly and aggressively. So hopefully we'll get a lot of applicants from the area.
Okay, because in addition to the two private schools, there is a public school nearby, say the two shopping centers, police officers, firemen.
Yep, that's
other
exactly the
town
target market.
employees, and that should be, I think, our target. Something similar was being done up in Napa, and I'm wondering if that could be looked at. I just think we should take care of the people who are working here first.
We agree, and that's what we'd like to do. To the extent it's legal, we'll do it.
That's fine.
Okay, Phyllis. Dr. Bundy.
Oh, Patty, in regard to the runoff on the stream, is the catch basin, will that be compliant with the Phase 2 stormwater requirements to minimize the size of anything that gets in the bay?
We have our consultants here today who can specifically answer that question.
Glad you asked.
Please, great, we got a drainage guy here, so,
Where's he hiding?
no, you please step up to the microphone, yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure. Bruce Fenton. I'm from RSA Plus Civil Engineers. We're based in Napa, which you just mentioned, but we had to go around a few road closures to get here tonight. So we're familiar with drainage problems at the moment. So in terms of sizing things that go into the bay, normally that the basin there currently has a grate on it. And there's a few, we can leave, our intention is to leave that there and have a basin behind it where it goes in, and then we would have, this is on the main stream, an inlet. The same inlet structure would work, or we can put another grate on that. So there's a couple options there. We also have, as part of our stormwater management plan, there's bioretention or tree boxes, which the runoff from the site goes through to meet the BASMA requirements, the Bay Area's requirements for stormwater quality, and so we have those throughout the site to treat runoff from the impervious surfaces. Now, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
So the other question I had was just in regard to the PV panels. These are going to be much longer than the example that we have here that lay between the seams. Is that correct?
That's correct. Longer, narrower.
Please step up. Got it. You got to get on the record. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, longer and narrower, and fit in between the standing seam metal roof.
And they just lay right on the roof?
Yes, in between the ribs of
Right.
the standing seam metal roof. This is just an example of the type of panel.
Yeah, very nice solution.
Thank you.
And do those become the homeowner then owns those things? It's not a part, you guys aren't responsible?
We own them
Okay.
because it's a rental
rental.
project.
Got
But
it.
if
All
you
right.
put them on your own home, yes.
All right. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. A general question. What happens if there's more than 48 cars out there? That's what you guys have parking for. So is the intention just to let them park on Robin Drive, or how do you want to address that? Or is there a management plan when you suddenly have too many cars out there?
I can answer that. We have a detailed management plan for all parking on any community that we own. So cars are registered with us, and we know exactly what the parking counts are, and they're restricted. And so if we have more cars than what's allowed or what capacity it holds, we then will our own selves police that and manage that. So the idea is we don't want abundance of cars. We want cars that are appropriate for the development site.
Got it. So that's, because they're rentals, you can
That's
make
correct.
those
correct.
dictations.
Yep.
Okay.
If I may just follow up on that, so we've also included conditions of approval that ensure that the garages at the properties are not used for storage space, that they are kept in a manner that would allow a car to park there and not prevent that. And just going back to the Phase 2 question explicitly, we have a condition of approval that ensures that that is the case.
Very good.
Thank you.
Chairman Chase,
yes.
just so you're aware that the driveways are also included in the parking counts that are on there. So the 48, that's inclusive of the tandems.
Tandem space.
Or non-inclusive, I'm
Not
sorry.
included, right.
Non-inclusive of the
Right.
tandem, sorry.
So, right,
Yeah, so there's excess capacity on the potential
So-
capacity on the site.
beyond that, right, so the guests don't have to walk up the hill. I'm just kidding. All right, no other questions then, before we say, I want to hear what the public has to say. So, with that said, we're going to do this public comment section with 3 minutes each. I'm going to time you. You're going to hear an obnoxious noise at the end of it. So if you would all please keep a queue going behind the microphone, and stand up, identify yourself, and let's get rolling with public comment, please. Please proceed.
Hello, my name is Annette Harris. I live at 15 Cibrian Drive, which many of you already know and has been identified. I am pleased to say that my husband and I and our family have been residents for 25 years. We've seen the existing apartments as apartments. We've seen them as potential condominiums. Now they're apartments again. Welcome to the area. We've also seen a lot of additional changes. We've seen fire come over that ridge. We've had the fire department come and get us ready to evacuate. And throughout all this, we've remained a neighborhood and a community. There are people here from Paradise Drive. One of our other neighbors from Cibrian had to leave. We have people from Taylor Road. And the one thing that I really want to impress upon AIMCO and also on the commission is that there is no dividing line when it comes to community or a neighborhood. You can't have a line or a fence or a road and say we don't all live in this together. And that's been the case. Now, I do have to say, I have a recommendation or two, but before I say that, I want to share with you, and this came about in the last 2 days, that there are very fancy presentations here, but this is a more primitive one. This is what we look at from our deck.
You'll have to grab the microphone if you want us to. All right. Thank you. This is what we've been.
That is what we look at from our deck. This brown piece here is our grandson's play station. That's his little playhouse. And so it looks from the elevation that these homes are further down than they are. But if you come and you stand on our deck and you're around our pool and sitting at our table where we spend time, this is what you see. Now, before you all jump up and down. It's not to scale, but it's what we could come up with in 2 days. Excuse me, are you listening or are you talking? Okay, thank you. But this is what we look at, and we wanted to share this with you. And please have you take into consideration. And towards that, I wasn't going to bring this up because I'm a Southern girl and I believe in being gracious. But when you all visited my property on the 7th, one of you made the statement, you know, we could have pushed this up to your property line, which I didn't think was very gracious. And then tonight, Patty, you made the comment, before when you had construction, you had nobody. You did. You had Tiburon residents, you had Corte Madera residents, and there was some mistake about a meeting. I just want to say and ask, would the commission please hear further comments about some of the particulars of this project that will come later, and consider postponing it for now?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Who's next, please? Yes. How many people would like to speak tonight? Okay. So as I say, if you guys would please keep a queue going behind the microphone. Okay, so we're being handed some commentary.
It's supposed to go to Adam.
Yeah, we give it to Adam here. So,
My name is Jim Malott. I'm an architect. I've practiced in Marin for 48 years. I wrote the design guidelines before you for the town of Tiburon back in 1981, and there are 5 communities of the 12 in Marin that have adopted all or part of those design guidelines for hillside housing. I will say that Aimco has done an admirable job on a not terribly easy site of nestling in some fine houses, and I do think that they have some merit. I'm approaching this from the standpoint of what the impacts are on the entire uphill neighborhood. And the reason is I've been hired by Mrs. Harris and Mr. Lupe to look at what is going to be the impact, the visual impact on their home. The biggest one is the roofscapes. Mr. Ulian was dead wrong when he showed you a photograph. That photograph was actually taken from the pool level. I'm going to run out of time here, but because I'm affecting all of the neighborhood up here, I would request 3 more minutes beyond the 3.
I can't, if somebody else would like to comment,
If somebody
that's
would
fine.
give me their time.
Or Caesar.
No, it
Lupe?
can't,
No,
somebody
they can
else.
cede their time. That's okay.
Okay.
Okay, the issues. Thank you. The issues are the roofscape primarily. The rest of the apartments over there all have white roofs. They're terribly reflective. And in addition to that, this solar panel over here is highly reflective when the sun is setting in the west behind Mount Tam, which is the view from the Harrison Lupe property. Color is a very important issue here. If you look at the existing apartments, they stand out on the hillside like a sore thumb, primarily because they're very light valued materials. The colors that we would request would be much darker, on the order of a 60% grayscale. And if you look in our design guidelines, the way we measure grayscale in large parts of Marin is take a black and white photograph of a hillside, and in general, the trees will be a 60% gray, say. If you can reach that darkness with the exterior colors of all of your home, you will find that the houses camouflage beautifully. A white house can be seen 20 miles away across the bay. In Berkeley, they can see our white houses, we see theirs. A gray house can't be seen a mile away. So it's critical. It's probably, after practicing this long in Marin, the most important thing that I know of in exterior design for residences, in keeping our hillsides beautiful rather than just looking like eczemas taking them over. The solar panels need to be addressed. They are reflective. They should be sloped to the south.
Okay, let me stop you for a second here. I want to address this with the attorney here, and so we have somebody else who would cede their time to this gentleman. Are we going to
it's, your rules don't speak specifically to that, so
Okay.
it's always defaults to the chair's
Okay,
discretion.
thank you. All right, I will, there was a gentleman over here who said he would, okay, give up her 3 minutes. All right, so go ahead, continue, please.
Thank you. The volume of the buildings is excessively large for one reason. The ceiling heights have all, or the roof heights, have all treated the 30-foot height limit as a target rather than a limit. So every single one of the buildings has 30-foot elements in it, which makes the overall project very vertical. This is caused by the 11-foot floor-to-ceiling heights in the bedrooms and the 15-foot ceiling heights in all of those slope ceilings. I think that those should be toned down. 15-foot ceiling is about 5 feet higher than this ceiling here. The screen trees on the site are all shown as juvenile trees. That is 10 to 15-year-old trees, maybe a little higher than this room. The real problem will happen 20 to 25 years from now when the trees that have been selected, all of which have mature heights of 60 to 90 feet, will cause complete view blockage of the Mount Tam view from the Harris and the other Cibrian properties and your own properties. My suggestion is that you do something similar to what we've worked out in Tiburon and elsewhere, which is to require a recorded pruning height for the development at 30, 35 feet, somewhere that will maintain at least an attempt to control the views. Views cause wars in Marin County, or loss of views. The exterior lighting is a very flat hat system. It should be a 45-degree downlight, shielded much more effectively than the one that they've selected is, and the standard should be painted matte black. And I would suggest that the open space be reached by publicly accessible and dedicated trails. I'm not quite sure I heard whether the trails were for the public or just for your tenants and owners, but they need to be accessible and connect to Ring Mountain. The other question is, why not just dedicate the Ring Mountain parcel if they're not going to use it? And why subdivide the parcel if they're not going to sell it? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next, who would like to say something? Please stand up.
Yeah, Ron Golden. I'm at 101 Taylor Road in Tiburon. Many of my comments here are based on going over the staff report and the attachments. They're many hundreds of pages long, so if I've made some mistakes in these comments, please forgive me. They're my mistakes and not on the staff report or the attachments. I had submitted a request that from Cibrian Drive down to Robin Drive, there's an existing open space parcel that goes about part way down there, that be allowed for a pedestrian walkway for residents up on the Cibrian area to get down to Robin Drive and then onto Paradise Drive. So those are written comments that are in there. My next comment is regarding the vegetation management plan, and this reflects the biological aspect of it, not the fire aspect of it. But on the southern portion of the lower area, that I'm not entirely sure if that vegetation is to be cleared out entirely, the invasive species, but if it is, that would be nice. Next comment is regarding the Paradise Drive multi-use pathway. That just came to my attention as part of this process, and I really want to thank the town of Corte Madera for putting that together. That's huge. That is, no exaggeration, going to be a lifesaver to get that area of Paradise Drive improved. That's, to us, just huge. Next question I have is, are there any ownership restrictions regarding Aimco and this property? By that I mean, can they sell it in 5, 10 years and into individual single-family dwellings? My concern there is if they were to do that, there would need to be a homeowners association established so that the commitments that Aimco is making are carried on to the new owners of these private open spaces. And the last comment I have is reflecting on staff and Aimco. We're very appreciative of keeping that upper parcel open space. That's a really big improvement to the area. You know, putting that one house up there would have been really a sore thumb up there. It's nice that that was kept open. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Hello, my name is Mark Lupe. I reside at 15 Cyprian Drive, married to Annette Harris. I have simple requests. Number one is I do sincerely appreciate the level of effort that AIMCO has been going through. I've been part of this project since 2012, whenever it started, and we saw the property was Corte Madera and was crap, and they've done a lot of good job in improving it. However, being there for 25 years, you know you do get biased because we've been there for 25 years. But in the report, there are three things that stand out to me. And graciously, AIMCO represented in a good meeting that they would not start construction until 8 a.m. I believe that's correct. And in your NOI-1, it says 7 a.m. So I would like that to be changed from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. All right, that's what's stated in their meeting. Secondly, I'd like to formally make the recommendations and modifications as indicated by our consultant, Mr. Jim Malott. And lastly, there's a document in your packet from a Margaret Deedy indicating, similar to what the gentleman just said, have a deed with the property that says that, listen, not change the type of property for about a 10-year period. AIMCO has done a very good job around the country, but as we well know, I've worked in corporate America for more than 35 years, and when there's a change of ownership, things happen. So if there could be something in the deed that restricts the type of property to keep it what it is today, that would be highly appreciative, unless there's some catastrophic changes that need to be modified. I'm sure that would be brought back to the commission for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Next, anybody else?
My name's Stacy Holland. My husband, Michael O'Donnell, and I have lived on Paradise Drive for 36 years. So just 2 points. First of all, Patty and crew, I want to thank you. You've done a beautiful job. And everybody here are very articulate. I'm very impressed. 2 requests. One is that on these apartment units for teachers and for workers, that you put into your code that you do their rent as a percentage of the other rent and go down 70% of the normal rent. I heard this gentleman saying, well, we can't really control that because, and I fear that it will get lost in the equation in a few years and those rents will escalate and be, quote, market driven. And the teachers and firefighters and those people really need a break. So make it a percentage of the other rents. And that way then we know that you'll control them. The other is the road is a terrible road, Paradise Drive, and you're unfortunately at the worst curve or a bad curve. I've been jogging along Paradise Drive and seen a school bus go over. Fortunately, there were no kids in it, but that was years ago. All I'm saying is I'm familiar with that road. At that curve, is it possible you could take some of your land and widen the roadway there to open up that bottleneck? Because there are going to be 40 extra cars at 8 o'clock going to work or 7 o'clock, and it is messy down there. It's already bad, and if you're going west, you pretty much can figure that at some point you'll get rear-ended. That's just a part of living there. It's very bad there already. So you drive there at 6:45 or 7 when schools are starting to open, or 8, and you will see what we mean. Because when you're going around the curve, all of a sudden, whoop. So something has to happen at that curve. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacy. Who else is going to speak here tonight? I'm not seeing anybody jump up or pop up. So what I'm going to do then is to, I'm going to ask AIMCO if they would like to respond to any of those comments that they heard there. And try to address some of these things, if you would, please.
Good evening. My name is Riley Hurd, also here on behalf of AIMCO. First of all, thanks to everyone for the comments. It's getting later. First, in response to some of the design issues, the imagery that you saw this evening as part of the presentation was to scale. It also showed...
Oops, excuse me, sorry, Ryan.
It also showed screening that's going to be planted and that was requested. And it's true, they were juvenile trees that are going in there, but they have to go in at some point. And the intention is certainly to keep those well below the level of the apartments in the distance. So if there's a condition of approval that needs to be added to address that, that's no problem whatsoever. I'd also like to point out that although we are using a PD to get a waiver from some of the development standards, some really important ones are not being waived, and that is the height. So there is no height variance requested, and I think even more importantly is the rear setbacks. So it sounds like a comment may have been misinterpreted. It was pointed out that under the R1 configuration in the town's housing element, the setback would have been 25 feet. And instead, as you saw, we have an average that's well above 60 feet. So instead of simply implementing the plan verbatim, we took a hard look. That's why we ended up with the PD, and this brought this much further down the hill from Cibrian than what the housing element said to do. So we improved on the town's, high-level plan by doing that. We did look at the request for the walking path from Cibrian down to Paradise. Unfortunately, that proposed area is located squarely within the riparian corridor that CDFW said was off limits. That's why we have the open space parcel there. It would also be an unusual place for people to be walking near where these new residences will be from a privacy perspective. But even with that set aside, CDFW said that area's off limits. We're doing a lot of work, preservation work there, actually. The question was asked, why are you subdividing if you don't intend to sell? The answer is because that's what the zoning requires. This is, our goal was to never change the base zoning. That was our advice from staff, from everyone we spoke to at the beginning. Yes, maybe change the overlay from HLC to PD as long as you respect the HLC, but stick with the base zoning. It's R1. I have actually used Mr. Jim Malot's design guidelines many times in Tiburon. They are a great document. But there was one addition to the design guidelines very recently, relatively recently. It had to do with borrowed views. It was added to the end of his document. And what it dealt with was people that lived next to unbuilt but developable parcels for long periods of time and became very accustomed to nothing being there. And the question was, what do we do about this problem that keeps presenting itself over and over when someone finally develops? And so his guidelines were updated to reflect the fact that that is a borrowed view, which you have in fact benefited from for multiple years because of this person's delay in developing. And it sounds like perhaps there's some of that is going on here. Not sure what to say about a deed restriction to keep it rental. Most of the time people are showing up and saying, we want for sale, not rental. AIMCO's plan is what their plan always is to buy and hold. So if you have any further questions for us, I'll just close by saying it's a little tough to hear some of this stuff now at the hearing. We've implored all neighbors over the past multiple years to tell us every issue you may have with this project, every single one. And for every one that we've heard, we've tried to be responsive, whether it's additional screening, whether it's a PV inlay in between the seams of the roofs. We'd ask that you take action on this tonight and approve the project in light of all of these responsive changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hang on there a second, Riley. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Hurd? Phyllis?
I have a question about the project that's been kind of fermenting in the back of my mind. We're talking about public open space and private open space.
Mm-hmm.
What is I know the difference is the ownership, but if somebody is walking up the trail, how are they going to know if they're on the private open space? May they go on the private open space, or is it just for the residents, or?
That's a great question, which I can respond to.
Thank you.
First of all, the trail is a public easement for
Right.
use by the public to get from the end of Robin Drive to the open space parcel that exists past this private property. It will be a well-defined trail leading to the open space. Difference between private and public open space is private open space is basically an undevelopable area privately owned that remains in its natural state. It is not for use by the public. That's the difference. And the question was asked, well, why don't you just give the parcel away? Well, we tried. And it turns out that the open space district, the open space trusts around town, they don't want parcels of this size. They're looking for either a massive takedown of land, or they don't want the maintenance responsibilities that come with it. Implementing the fire VMP, all the things that AIMCO is going to have to do as a responsible owner of this site. So that's why it's private open space. And then on the lower portion of the site, that's where you would always use a private open space. You want public areas between homes.
Right, but on the upper portion.
Yes.
Somebody's walking on the trail and steps off the trail into the private open space.
Mhm.
Bells and whistles are not going to go off, and everybody's going to get all excited.
That's
It's
correct.
not differentiated in any way, except maybe there's some small sign or something,
Let me put it this way. That's been private property this whole time.
and nobody's paid attention to that fact, I think.
That's why I think making the trail public in perpetuity is one of the great gifts of the project.
Right, and that's not, okay.
Okay, thank
Got it.
you.
Dr. Bundy.
In regard to the comments about the PV reflectivity, I knew that that was something that you were trying to address from our previous conversations. And knowing what most mounted PVs look like as far as reflective, this looks like a lower reflective PV product that I'm not sure if there's anything that's going to be non-reflective, but this looks much better, much more integrated into the roof line than what a typical PV project would be. Is there a better solution than, what's being proposed?
So let me tell you this. First of all, PV is absorptive by nature. That's the design. But second of all, when we heard those comments, the search was on. That's how we found this product. What most folks are used to seeing is the lay flat panels that are on top of the roof. They're very visible. And when we came across this, we said, this is it. It's down in a trench between the raised portions of the seam. It's rolled out. It's very, very thin. And you actually get some of the screening from the seams themselves. But we found this to be the very best solution. Also remember that the solar rooftop it is a requirement, not a choice. It's not optional. So the question is, what is the least impactful way to do something the state is forcing us to do? Of course, I understand the public policy behind it. It's great. But then you have people come to hearings and say, I don't want to see solar. We think we found that solution. It strikes a balance. We have no choice. So we found the best solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Since we've heard a couple of requests for this, and you're the attorney in the room, regarding deeds to this property and so forth, whether it's something in perpetuity placed on it, this is, you've got a company that holds this property, you have the rights to do whatever you want with it, but speak to, I know staff report has some of it, but for the public here, would you please speak about putting restrictive deeds on these units in some way or not, and why you can't or why you won't and so forth, just for the information.
Restrictive deeds in what regard?
Maintaining them as rentals, the ADUs,
Mm-hmm.
and then secondly, something that would restrict the rent, so to speak, as a percentage of income or a percentage of typical, some market rate, so forth, out there. So and we've seen where restrictions have unintended consequences down the road. That's always the case, it seems like. But
Sure.
since this has come up and people are asking for restrictive deeds on what happens to these properties. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll start with the first part of your question, which is built into these conditions of approval are a bunch of triggers that occur if Aimco were to ever sell any of these lots. So immediately you revert to the owner occupancy restriction for the ADUs. Prior to sale, you're required to come up with the CC&Rs and HOA for the governance of the site. So there's no mechanism by which you could sell off these lots and somehow escape the conditions or anything like that. The deed restricting the ADUs on income is something we looked at very extensively. First of all, it has been shown that there is no difference in the rental rate of an ADU whether there's owner occupancy or not. So if you want the lawyer answer, the answer is there is not a nexus between the deviation from the code requested in the PD, i.e. relaxing the owner occupancy, and the ability to do something that isn't done on any other ADU in town, which is to apply an income-based deed restriction. That's the lawyer answer. The real-world answer is 700 square foot units in Marin County built as new are unheard of. There is no developer that comes to town and builds a product of that type. They're aiming high-end. So this is what we call affordable by design. When you have a 700 square foot unit, even the market rate on that, with the AMI that we have in this county, which is north of 100,000, you are moderate to low already, based on the square footage, even at market. So secondary answer is it's not necessary. Third answer is it's not done anywhere in this town. There is no deed restricting ADUs for the reasons that were already discussed by staff. So there's a three-part answer to the second part of your question.
I appreciate that. That clarifies it, and I think it puts it on the record. So with that said, anything else that you want to respond to that was brought up?
No, I mean, we're multiple years into this. I don't think a continuance is appropriate. We'd like to hear your opinion.
Okay. So,
thank you.
Now that you guys, thank you very much, Riley. You guys have responded to this. I haven't closed the public hearing yet, so we still have an opportunity to speak. If you haven't spoken, I'd like to hear from you. But if you have to speak again, based on what you heard, okay. So please go ahead.
Can I just speak?
No, you have to stand up there, Stacy.
Just to go over the ground briefly, on that percentage, to hear somebody say that it's never been done, so that takes care of it, I don't think that's good enough. In other words, to hear that, I mean, maybe you'll literally break ground with a policy that you will be 70% of the other market rate, and you'll hold the line so that those units are affordable, because without that, they're going to not be affordable. So to be told, well, nobody's doing it, so we're not going to do it, is not, let's try.
Thank you very much. Sir, yeah, if you want to speak, please do so.
Yes, it's Mark LePay again. The gentleman, the attorney, sir.
Mr. Hurd.
Okay, so I'm quite aware about borrowed views, and I just want to place on the commission's perspective here that we're not there to say we want to hold up the project. We know about borrowed views. The homes to our right were not there when we moved in originally. We're now requesting, all we're requesting is to make sure that you take our area into consideration, genuinely so. So when you come and do a rendering, have some dialogue with us. Tonight was the first time we saw a rendering. It was promised that we we're going to go through that today. No one showed up at 11 o'clock as scheduled, yet we see it tonight. So just be genuine, and we can work this out. So I'd like to make sure the commission puts that into the record, that there's some cooperation between Aimco and us when you start trying to shield the property. That's all we're asking.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. Sir, if you would like to speak, then step up to the microphone.
I'd like to point out two things. One is the current view from the Cibrian area is approximately 1/3 filled with buildings. The top third of the view is Mount Tam, the bottom third is this valley. The result of this project will be to take that view and make 2/3 of it built area. I'm talking about from the main primary living areas of the residences up there. So the impact is huge. And I would like you to consider the color, light to dark value, it's called, of the project more seriously. I'd like to hear your comments on it. I think it's a simple change to make. It's easy to do, and it has a huge impact on the visibility. They do not have to match the colors of those apartments, which are cream-colored and screaming orange. They can make something more sensitive to the hillside.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, so at this point, I don't see any other raising. Phyllis?
I'd like to ask a question. Is it appropriate for the people from IMCO to respond to what was just said
Yes,
about changing the
They
roof
can,
colors?
yeah.
Sure,
They
if
should.
you have any questions, further questions for the applicant team, based on what you've heard from the community, this would be the time to ask that. And if you have further questions for staff or the staff team.
We'd like to also clarify a couple of things as well, or try to answer some questions as well after
I
that.
just specifically wanted to hear that discussion of the colors.
All right.
And
So, that said, looks like you're the architecture guy who will respond to that.
no, the architect is behind.
As you can see on the material board over here to the left, the upper left portion of it is the gray color. That is the standing seam metal roof, which, as you can see from the site plan, is almost 50% of all of the roofs as shown here. And then the wood look color is very different from our existing preserve orange. We learned our lessons, and this is a much more natural wood look, contextual with natural trees, as well as the gray on the lower right, which is another light gray facade treatment. And then the stone to the left, again, another light gray facade stone treatment. The stucco is not bright white. It is an off-white cream to definitely make these facades much more subtle than they do in the renderings, unfortunately. That's the difference between the computer resolution and the physical material board, which is why we brought it here today to show you the true natural colors, not the orange, the grays and earth tones of the overall project.
May I ask a follow-up?
Okay.
Looking at the proposed development, if I'm looking in the proper direction, the lower right-hand corner would be towards Cyprian, is that
Lots
correct?
8, 9, 10, 11,
Okay.
12 are the
And
lots
it
that
shows a number of trees between the units, the structures, and the edge of the property. That is not shown in this particular picture. Will there be trees blocking some of the view of the units themselves?
Yes, and there's a rendering in the presentation that best represents it.
Yes, Adam.
Yeah, I think it's important that we try to clarify that, because this has been sort of a recent conversation that's come up as we dove a little bit deeper into the habitat issues. Some of that area, in fact, will not be suitable for planting trees because it is needlegrass habitat, and if you start to plant trees, that competes with that sort of conservation requirement, and the special status. I'm going to get this right. It's not the species or the habitat of that area, sensitive habitat area. So, in fact, one of the conditions or mitigation requirements of the CEQA document is to actually, at a later time when the biologist, and I think Christine referred to this, that the biologist is actually going to have to evaluate exactly where it would be appropriate to plant some trees in this particular area. There are some locations where there is currently invasive French broom and some pine trees that could be replanted with different trees. But I think it should be realized that there are other areas where there may be limited vegetation or trees that could be planted there, and it would be the natural needlegrass habitat. So I think I would agree that some of these images that are being shown that show a lot of tree planting shouldn't be relied upon to sort of indicate that this is going to be screened from a standpoint of up above it looking down to these structures. It's yet to be determined, I think is the best way to explain it. Just wanted to, I thought we think it's important to clarify that at this time, given that we're talking about those trees.
I saw a number of places in the document where it refers to the continuing involvement of the vegetation management person for the specific purpose of determining the best place for plants. It's in the staff. Right. Yeah, and the conditions of approval. Okay. So you also had some questions you'd like to respond to, or statements.
Well, I've just been noting comments as they've been coming along, and a number of them were addressed, but just to put a finer point on a couple of things,
please.
It's more global if this is the right time. So we do have Condition 68, which implements conditions and covenants on the property should it transfer ownership. And so you would have all the appropriate HOAs or regulations in place at that time if that was done. So there is that stopgap, and I think Mr. Hurd alluded to that. Included within that is a reference to Condition 52, which deals with that owner occupancy waiver and the explicit requirement that if it was to revert to a for sale property on a parcel by parcel basis or as a whole, that if it became a single family neighborhood in ownership structure, the owner occupancy requirement would be applicable to all of those lots. So that is in our conditions, and I think Adam addressed the other one that I wanted to mention. It is possible, and this is one of the options that's presented to the commission tonight. We have prepared resolutions that we feel we can recommend approval of. However, it's possible to take a look at those resolutions and include additional conditions that address some of the comments that we've heard tonight. So the issue of color or any specific resolution that might be found on that issue, if everyone is agreeable, can be included in the resolutions, and we can incorporate them before it moves on to the next stage, if that is the will of the commission.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Annette, you would like to make another comment? I'm going to let you speak if it's new material.
It is new material.
Okay.
And that is, I promise, that is that we feel it's critical that AIMCO commit to some of the recommendations that have been made, that they commit this evening, that they'll come back with new drawings that reflect commitments that are being made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to close off the public hearing section of this. So public comment is over with now. We're going to bring it back to us and staff at this point. So,
Just a couple, I guess, at this point, we can do a couple of reminders just in terms of the rules and procedures of the commission and for the public, so they know that at 10 o'clock, there has to be a vote by the commission. Majority of the commission can vote to continue the meeting to 10:30. At 10:30, it would have to be a unanimous vote of the commission to continue it to 11 p.m. And then at that point, the meeting has a dead stop. And then just another reminder, I know commission is well aware, but for the public as well, the resolutions are obviously for the commission would be recommendations to the town council. There is a additional stop on this process that I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of.
Right. This is not a go-ahead for the project out of our hands tonight. It goes before the council. So with that said, in 5 minutes, we'll decide what to do. So I have a couple of questions. Phyllis, do you have any more questions for staff?
No.
Okay. Dr. Bundy?
Yes, it seems like the applicant is agreeable to a condition of approval to prune to maintain a certain height of tree. How can we best incorporate that into the document?
If I may just add on top of that a little bit. So the trees that have been out there on the property were not in the a lot of them were not in the 1966 photograph or whatever it is of the property. So they've grown 30 feet tall out there at this point. I think to say that anything's going to be taller than a building out there would be a significant assumption beyond what's occurred. So I would say if it's a building a building height is the limitation, then that's what we'd put on it, is to say building height, or maybe a 30-foot tree takes a long time to grow. I just don't see how it's going to happen. So we have a commenter here, just a second. She may say something. So in any case, I understand the condition. We might want to just say that they get trimmed to a height. And Bob, what would you want as a height?
I would really look at the height to protect the property owners above the site. So it could certainly get higher than the buildings that are being proposed, but not to the extent that it would block the views of the neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a one that we could explore more. I frankly, it's a challenging one from the perspective of ongoing monitoring and requirements and making sure how it can work again with agreeable neighbors. And when neighbors, in fact, I was talking to Mr. The architect and designer who wrote the Tiburon Design Guidelines about his experience with some of I know Tiburon and Belvedere, they have some of these requirements where hedges and other things can't grow into above a certain height or views, and again with agreeable neighbors, I think that can work fine. It gets tricky to actually enforce, or I shouldn't say it's tricky. It takes a lot of effort and time and energy on behalf of staff, and going forward, I would prefer to try to find an alternative, and that would be something of the last resort, if that is really something that needs to be done. I think one option, it creates a different thing. I guess what the purpose would be to have screening, but preserve views. Is that the?
Yes.
Okay.
So if the trees got tall enough to block something beyond the buildings and started to intrude upon open views to the water, I would say that's a point at which they need to be trimmed. But that's going to be probably 40, 50 feet, and that's not in our lifetime, or
No,
if ever. I
many,
don't know.
many years.
But right now, we have two competing comments. One is that we don't want to see the buildings, and the other part is we want to shield the buildings. So I would say that if the if the trees get to where they block the water view, we would say, let's get them trimmed. That could be a condition. If the trees become tall enough to block the water view.
But okay. I think it's difficult. It's from where, and you have to define that, and you have to get very specific about what views and from where you're talking about. I do think we might be aided by somebody who had some expertise in terms of the typical height of these trees, or what are proposed to be planted in these areas, and how high they may actually grow, and where they would be planted. But we don't have that at this point in time. The benefit of sort of an arborist, who the town does have those resources, but that could speak to that. But I find that, anyways, I understand where the commission's going. I just find that a very challenging proposition.
So then it becomes AIMCO represents themselves to be a good neighbor, and I think they will be. So we might have to just take it on faith that they would bring it to the town themselves.
Or you can condition it is a recommendation to council, and even if we aren't crafting the condition tonight, you can, whatever your recommendation is, if you decide to move this forward, you can move it forward with those comments and recommendations.
Phyllis?
I was going to suggest, when Adam brings this forward to the council, as part of your report, you make mention that these were certain conditions that we could
Right,
not
okay.
address at the time and that they should look at.
All right. Shall we go forward beyond 10?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you want to make
Okay.
a motion?
Please.
I move that we continue the meeting until 10:30.
All right. Okay. All right. Voice vote?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We shall continue. And I guess a question for staff here would be, how do we condition the 3 lots with these moved houses? So that's just something that gets presented with these 3 positionings moved on the property?
You're referring to the alternative site plan
Right.
that was presented as a concept?
Yes.
So the question is about how that condition might be worded in order to presumably incorporate
Yes.
that?
Correct.
So the condition would be, Judith, if you want to help me here, but we can include a condition that requires a revision to the site plan that incorporates the concept plan as presented. And it would be incumbent on the applicant to fully vet that and prepare the site plan that
So
demonstrates
I'm
it.
asking how we would do that. Secondly,
So in your motion tonight, if, if you reach some sort of consensus or to get to the point of a motion tonight, then clarify in the motion that you would want to incorporate the concept plan and whether or not that concept plan has to be developed, prior to the time that council reviews that.
secondly, in the RSA plan showing the setbacks, it shows that there's front yard encroachments, right, on their TM-4 as a matter of course. So,
So that is correct. So the plan development, I'm looking at attachment 19 in the packet. Adam, if you can assist with the master page number. This is the table that goes lot by lot and identifies the development standards and where they deviate, highlighted in gray. So the front yard setback is smaller. Currently, the R1 standard is 20 feet, and there are several, the majority of the parcels are less than that, the minimum being 3 feet.
It's in this.
okay, so they're positioned this way by the applicant on the basis of need. Hi, can I ask Mr. Malat to either step outside or if you want to have a conversation, please? Thank you.
Yeah, and to that point, I think if we do go with an alternative site plan, and going back to your prior comment, we would want to know exactly what the modifications would be associated with that would need to be similar to what you're referring to here in terms of modifications to height, setbacks, other things, in order to actually approve entitlements that facilitate the project in the alternate site plan.
Anything else you guys would like to offer up at this point?
No.
Go ahead.
One very small point that I forgot to address after the comments is there was a comment made about the time, allowed construction time, 7 to 4. So this was based on harmonizing it with the town standard as well as the town of Tiburon standard. So we took the most constrictive once you combine those two. I think there was a comment about the 8 a.m. again. That's another one that can be added as a condition and revised.
So there's a dual a conflicted pronouncement in the staff report about that time start?
No, the pronouncement is consistent. I'm just clarifying that where we got the 7 to 4 from, it was making sure that we're hitting both the requirements for Corte Madera and Town of Tiburon as far as construction. But we have on top of that layered an additional restriction on when deliveries and truck activity can happen to avoid the school periods, which overlap with that 7 a.m. Reference. So you're kind of covered on both.
I think Milan's recommendation is that if you do want to incorporate the recommendation or the offer of the 8 a.m., that you be clear on that during your motion.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to suggest we head into some discussion here, unless you have some other questions for staff or anyone. Phyllis? Dr. Bundy?
No more questions.
Okay.
Just in regard, it sounded like the 8 a.m. start was more voluntary on the part of the applicant, and, you know, I know that 7 o'clock is the usual starting time for construction, because I've had a couple projects going on in my neighborhood. And it also seems like it really needs to be tied into the school traffic pattern that we have. I mean, it may be better to get the crew there at 7 o'clock. So I would not want to put a specific requirement or condition on this as far as the starting time, but if the 8 o'clock starting time works out, doesn't impact traffic, I'm sure the neighbors will be happy with that. But I wouldn't want to put that on as a requirement.
Just a sec, Phyllis. Staff has in the report, there's a schedule of start times in here, and I forget exactly where it is in here, but it's like 8 something.
The schedule is, I think, most explicit in the conditions. This is condition 14, hours of construction. It includes a lot of our standard hours of construction detail. Page 280 in the full packet, if you're looking at the red numbering. So we have an explicit call out for holidays, a different timing for the weekends, which is 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. No construction shall be permitted on Sundays at all. But during the week, Monday through Friday, it's 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., consistent with Corte Madera and Tiburon standard.
All right, I was referring to somewhere there was the school start times.
Right, so right above that, condition 13 is the construction management plan, which requires a detailed plan that covers a variety of different things. One of the conditions that must be incorporated into the construction management plan is that the deliveries and truck activity for the construction work will be offset from the time where school buses and
There it is,
drop-offs.
right. So I would say that the project would develop that in response to it rather than a blanket condition. Yes, Phyllis?
I was going to try to just make it simple and to incorporate that the start time to be adapted to not interfere with school start time.
And that's what they're asking for in the
But
condition.
I'm saying
yeah.
you could just say that in one sentence and not go
No,
through.
They've got it in the CMP.
I know the attorney doesn't like it.
All right.
But
So Phyllis, I'd like you to start in on some of the assessment of what we've heard and your assessment of the project, and regarding the 4 critical elements that we have here, these 4
The 4 resolutions.
You know, first the negative deck. Can you make the findings? As always, we have to be clear that we can make every one of the findings that's listed under these things. So
Do you want me to make a motion and then we discuss it? Or how do you want to do this?
No, I want to hear some color. I want to hear your thoughts and any response to things we've heard tonight. And I want to limit this to about, at max, 5 minutes ahead here, so, you know.
I can make the findings needed to adopt the resolution that covers the initial study and mitigated negative declaration.
Okay.
And anything that's
So then when it
works
goes
with
to
it.
the zoning amendment and the PD overlay district, right, essentially, are you okay with this? Or what would you say?
I can approve the mitigated negative declaration and any of the adjacent requirements that go along with it that are part of Resolution 19-007.
Okay.
I mean, if you want me to read out the whole thing.
No.
You wanted
I'm
it
just
fast,
trying
I
to
gave it
get
to
a
you
read
fast.
on various elements here.
It might be helpful, just, sorry, to clarify. So this project is a project, it's a whole, but the entitlements are broken into 4 parts. So recommendations for each 4.
Right. But I'm just reading what is in the first resolution. That's the first of the 4 parts. That's page 46 if you're looking for it in your.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing, Phyllis, is you want to do it one at a time here and go through that? I was asking you for.
You wanted all 4 resolutions to be
No,
addressed?
I just want to hear what you are, if you have any response to what we've heard tonight, or anything you want to say about the project, or any conditions that you would put upon the project?
Now, I read through all four of the resolutions, the conditions that were attached to it, and I think the things that came up that we could and should address in one way or another would be having to do with making sure that the trees are trimmed to not block the views of the neighbors. That the concept plan that was, wait for you to write it down. Okay, the concept plan that was presented, and it should be developed by the time it goes to the council for its review.
Okay.
And what I just said about, as far as starting time, that it should be adapted to not interfere with the school start times. Those were essentially three things that I picked up from comments made.
All right. Dr. Bundy?
In regard to the resolutions, I can make the findings with the stipulation for conditions that Phyllis just expressed. Overall, this project reminds me of the Verona Place project of 15 years ago, where there was initial proposal for, I think, 700 units that was objected strenuously to the people that lived above that up on the hill. And Verona Place eventually got developed as 12 or 14 units that everybody has really been very happy with. I think AMCO has really done a good job of responding to the neighbors. I think the colors on the new project, as opposed to the orange on the rehabilitated, renovated apartment complexes, really look quite nice, and I think blend in to the environment. I recognize that photovoltaics are required, and they're a good thing, and we should try to do that. It does impact some people that are going to be above them, but it is a requirement. I think AMCO has done a good job of minimizing that impact to the greatest extent possible. So I am comfortable with what they have done to try to listen to the neighbors and respond to the neighbors, and they have created a unique property. I think the addition of the ADUs is going to be helpful to the community, and I would not at this point want to try to come up with some scheme that would restrict what the rents are going to be. I think that could have a chilling effect on other people in the community that are thinking about doing that, and we just have no way of knowing if there's really even going to be a problem at this point, and that we're going to get the benefit of some additional ADUs.
Thank you, Bob, very much. I would, for myself, like to say that I thank staff for putting together a tireless effort here to get this well-defined, and I know it's been a long haul, but it's really an excellent report. So thank you for doing that. It's really great. I think the AIMCO, this process has gone on for several years now. You guys have made yourself available to the community, and I remember looking at these elevations, and I have my set from 2 years ago right here, and it's been on the website for all that time. It's been available for the community to look at. I don't think there's any shortage of effort by AIMCO to reach out, and I wish that this was the example of outreach that everyone would follow in the future. It's been sort of extraordinary to see that, and I think that the horsepower that AIMCO brings to the situation is unusual, and I would say that as a result we have a project that's incredibly well defined, and I think the flexibility that they've shown in creating this is extraordinary, because they could come along with roadblocks and fights, and they've chosen not to. So I think that they've listened and incorporated a great many things into this. At the same time, I appreciate some of these comments, and there are feelings of the neighbors and people that they really feel as if they're impacted in these negative ways. I think that the Aimco property has a right to develop, and the right to develop, they've done very responsibly. And when you look at this compared to what might have been there, this is a good project. I think that their embrace of all the information that has come at them from the CEQA process as well as from staff is reflected in the outcome of what we see here. A very comprehensive plan, and it's got enough bells and whistles on it to keep this thing all the way through to completion on track and without a problem. Although there will be some, but you know, it's so carefully thought through. It eliminates a lot of the problems that we've all experienced with other development. We know they exist. Adam has seen many problems, and he has incorporated solutions into this. It's not to say that there won't be problems out there. Everybody has to understand that when you bring something new in, it's going to have an impact, and it's going to be upset for a little while. And in a number of years, I think the value of this project to the town will be appreciated for its rental and Aimco's contribution to the housing stock. I think that's incredibly important. When I first came to being on the commission, and someone pointed out to me this property out there and the idea that this is the result in a number of years ago, it's a great result given what I had heard could go out there, and what we've ended up with is much better than where it started. So the idea that they haven't responded to anything, I think, is misspoken. I understand the trail from the lower space up to the mountaintop there would be great, but I saw it today and I thought, nice trail. But I read the report and they can't really do it. It's there that the tracking of material up and down the hillside would not be appropriate. And in projects I've done, we've had to limit that for the very reason of tracking seeds, mud, people, dogs, and all that up and down the hill. It's just not appropriate. So even though I would value that shortcut, it's not a shortcut that can be created. So I look forward to seeing how the landscaping develops over the years, and that the management plan is in place and acted upon over the next several years of the project. So I'm hoping that council will approve it, and I'm going to say that I will stand for making all the findings of all 4 resolutions. So with that said, if you guys have no objection or anything else you want to say, I would entertain a motion for starting with the mitigated negative deck, and make a motion for that approval.
You want to do them separately then?
Yes, we have to.
Okay. May I just make a suggestion before we go ahead, because I heard the concern of the Harrises. Ms. Harris, she's still here. If the trees cannot be on the property of the preserve, this is not really a condition to put in. Is there some way Aimco could meet with the people on Cyprian and at their expense plant trees on the other side of the property? Is that something that could be worked out as a possibility?
I think they could work that out, but I'm not sure that the fire marshal and the people would, let more trees go on that hillside up there. That would be up to them.
I'm talking about the people in Cyprian, if there was just something that could be done. I don't know.
You just look at that view right there, and if a 30-foot tree is in front of one of those buildings, it's got another 20, 30 feet to go before it rises above that ridge line. So that would be a mammoth tree, the likes of which I don't know is around
I was
there.
looking at trees down
Yeah,
here.
and they have
where-
some behind the project in the plan.
Yeah, I see.
That will do some screening,
Okay.
but, I think, it could be a part of the discussion that
Between Aimco and the people who live at 15
So we could say that we
Cyprian.
would like the council to put a request for Aimco to establish a discussion and a planning
I wouldn't
committee.
even make it formal, I would just
Right.
ask.
That's what
and-
I'm saying.
Oh.
Yeah. Ask council to write in that it gets recorded as a part of the approval. And AIMCO hears this, they can respond to that separately in some way, outside of this hearing. I think
Okay.
it would be perfectly acceptable to ask them to do that.
Okay.
So,
Right. Are you going to make the motion, Bob?
In the recommendation to the town of Corte Madera Town Council for approval of a resolution certifying an initial study and mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting plan for the residences at the Preserve subdivision, application submitted by Aimco Robin Drive LC for a zoning amendment, plan development, preliminary plan, precise plan, tentative map, and design review to subdivide the property into 19 lots with a private access road and construct 16 single-family units and 8 accessory dwelling units and associated landscaping, tree removal, and site improvements at the base of Robin Drive. Application number 038-011-21. Do I need to read anything else on that? Resolution number 19-007, permit number PL-2017-0055 to 2017-0061.
Second.
okay.
Commissioner Bundy?
Aye.
Vice Chair Metcalf?
Aye.
Chairman Chase?
Aye. So can we
Okay,
can
I'll
do
read
this
the
by
next one.
a resolution number, or do you want the reading of the whole thing, paragraph?
I think as long as you all recognize which resolution you're referring to, that is fine. I would note, with regard to the specific condition of approval that you would like added regarding the alternative site plan changes, that would be, that should be done in concert with the resolution. Sorry, I'm looking at the plan development, preliminary plan, and tentative subdivision map. Resolution number 19-009. And then anything related to tree trimming, I would, that should be related or done in conjunction with a resolution or a motion for 19-010, that resolution related to the precise
10.
plan and
And the time,
design review.
the starting time?
So the starting time is already included in the conditions?
No,
and
adding the statement, adding the
So-
sentence. That should be, which one is that?
It's in under 15, right, you said?
We've got 010, 090, 08, and 007. Those are the 4 resolutions.
Oh, but the
So the
condition is placed.
Project,
Go ahead,
project,
I'm sorry.
project condition 13 is that construction management plan where we have the
Right.
language about the explicit times so that it does not, I'll read it out.
No, does it appear in one of the resolutions?
The resolutions bring in,
We've done it a little bit differently because we have a separate conditions of approval document
Yes.
here, but it would essentially be attached to each of the resolutions. I believe that's how it was set up, so.
Okay. So you will add that sentence to wherever it should be.
Okay, so we have nothing to attach to resolution 19-008, which is the zoning amendment.
Okay.
So,
In the matter of recommendation to the Town of Corte Madera Town Council to approve an ordinance adopting a zoning amendment to rezone the project site to the Planned Development Overlay District for the residences of Preserve Subdivision application submitted by Aimco Robin Drive, LC, enabling a plan development, preliminary plan, precise plan, tentative map, and design review to divide the property into 19 lots and a private access road and construct 16 single-family units with 8 accessory dwelling units and associated landscaping, tree removal, and site improvements at the base of Robin Drive. Application number 038-011-21, permit number PL-2017-0055 to 2017-0061.
That's resolution number 19-008.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's your
So
motion?
that's my motion. We need a second, Bob.
I thought we just approved that.
No, we
Just
did
a second.
7.
We
Now
did
we're doing
7?
8.
Oh, okay. Second.
Okay.
Commissioner Bundy,
Aye.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Aye.
Chairman Chase.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be mad.
Now you're going to do an
Recommendation to the Town of Corte Madera Town Council to adopt a plan development, preliminary plan, and tentative subdivision map for the residents at Preserve Subdivision. Application submitted by AMCO Robin Drive LC to subdivide the property into 19 lots with a single private access road and to construct 16 single-family units with 8 accessory dwelling units and associated landscaping, tree removal, and site improvements at the basin of Robin Drive, with the condition that the alternative site plan incorporate the movement of the houses closer to the drive.
And I would just add, and also incorporating, the motion should incorporate all of the conditions of approval listed in attachment 22.
And all the conditions of approval in 22.
Thank you.
Application number 038-011-21, resolution number 19-009, permit number PL-2017-0055 to 2017-0061.
Second.
Commissioner Bundy,
Aye.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Aye.
Chairman Chase.
Aye. And finally, resolution number 19-010 regarding the design review, precise plan and design review. So do we have a motion for that one?
I move resolution number 19-010 in the matter of recommendation to the Town of Corte Madera Town Council to approve a precise plan and design review to construct 16 single-family units with 8 accessory dwelling units and associated landscaping, tree removal, and site improvements at the base of Robin Drive. Application number 038-011-21, permit number PL-2017-0055 to 2017-0061, with the inclusion of the condition of keeping that the trees be kept trimmed to a height to not block the views of the neighbors.
And
Second.
And also including the
And-
conditions of approval as listed in attachment 22.
Does that go on all 4 of them?
Just the last 2.
Oh, okay. So hit that in.
And the conditions of approval,
Attachment.
In
Listed in
22.
attachment
attachment
22.
right? Okay,
Second.
okay.
Okay. Commissioner Bundy,
Aye.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Aye.
Chairman Chase.
Aye. Okay. Issue is therefore closed. It's going to go to the town council. Do we have any idea what that time frame would be?
No.
Okay.
Not at this time, but as soon as possible.
Read
You have-
appeals?
No, are there appeals?
There are not appeals because it's already going to the town council, and town
All right.
council will make the final decision.
Thank you. I want to thank you guys. So move to adjourn?
Yes.
Yes.